Chapter 641, Four Snowflakes. Feng Ming was not infuriated when Lin Xintong obstructed him, instead, he found it amusing. He could forget the fact that he was no match for Yi Yun, but who was this woman? How dare she act so audaciously? Yi Yun, who had suddenly appeared this year, revealing an incomprehensible strength, was already curious enough. Could the woman before them be another peerless genius? If there were so many geniuses hidden in the world, then geniuses would no longer be rare. Feng Ming laughed without any civility. What day is it? Why are there so many people thinking that they are invincible? Do you know how the word death is written for you to hold so many of us off? Sheiji also laughed. Little girl, how old are you? Are you even 20? They shared the same gender, but Sheiji had lived 3 lives, so in her eyes, Lin Xintong was just a little child. For a junior girl to have a demeanor of an immortal, and say things like "your opponent is me," was extremely laughable. Today, let this elder sister teach you how big the world is and what true strength is like. Sheiji gave a clear cry and suddenly attacked. Her figure blurred, as she split into 3 figures, which attacked Lin Xintong from 3 different angles. At the same time, a gigantic azure snake appeared behind Sheiji. It was her aspect totem and it was opening its jaws to bite at Lin Xintong. Lin Xintong appeared calm and nonchalant towards Sheiji. She did not emit any terrifying aura. She only nonchalantly lifted her hand and lightly tapped her sword. Every tap she made resulted in a white snowflake to appear on the tip of the sword. Lin Xintong did it a total of 4 times, tapping out 4 snowflakes. From the beginning to the end, she did not emit any surging yuan qi. It was calm and peaceful, as if she was not brandishing her sword, but just drawing with a brush on an invisible cloth, dabbing and drawing out white plums. Such a move? Sheiji harumphed coldly. The gigantic azure snake behind her spat out a toxic mist, and at the same time, the 3 Sheijis attacked together. One of them held a sword, another held a lancet, while the last one held a Mei daggers. The 3 different weapons also proved that the figures Sheiji formed were not afterimages. They were true avatars. This was one of the high-grade divine techniques from the Martial Alliance's treasury. Yuan Qi was condensed to form a temporary avatar which could aid in her battles. Yuan Qi whistled as they interweaved to form a large web. She was planning on using sword qi and blade beams to completely shatter the 4 snowflakes Lin Xintong produced. But when the pretty but weak-looking snowflakes clashed with the sword qi and blade beams, an expected explosion did not happen. Each of the 4 snowflakes contained different heavenly Dao laws. The structure of the snowflakes formation intercrossed to form an array pattern. The 4 snowflakes was like a mini array. It contained the condensation of pure yin and water elemental laws. Not only was it extremely yin and cold, it was also extremely heavy. It was like 400,000 snow mountains compressed to a point. Ka ka ka. Sheiji's sword qi and blade beams froze in place, turning into ice crystals. And behind Sheiji, the toxic mist the gigantic azure snake spat out also froze to become a white ice wave. The frost aura surged forward and froze everything it passed. Sheiji was greatly alarmed. At this point, she knew she was no match for this girl at all. She forcefully stopped her attack and tried to retreat. However, the ever-burgeoning frost aura was like a maggot that clung onto her, impossible to shake off. Out of the 4 snowflakes, 3 of them struck Sheiji's 3 figures. As for the final snowflake, it struck the gigantic snake behind Sheiji. Only then did people know the reason why Lin Xintong had conjured 4 snowflakes. It was prepared for the 3 Sheijis and her aspect totem. There was not one bit more, showing her absolute confidence. Pa! 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 The moment the snowflakes made contact, a boundless frost qi exploded, forming ice. Sheiji's 2 yuan qi avatars were directly frozen and slowly dissipated into yuan qi ice crystals within the frost ice. Her aspect totem did not last much longer. After it was sealed in ice, it immediately disintegrated. Sheiji grunted as her face turned white. Although warriors could conjure an aspect totem after it was disintegrated again, they would receive a spiritual backlash as a result, hurting their soul C. But now, it was not as trivial as a backlash. Lin Shintone's final ice crystal was already in front of Sheiji's body. Careful! Behind Sheiji, Fengming realized Sheiji was about to be defeated, so he charged forward. With a snap, he opened his folding fan, and there were numerous flower petals on one side of the fan. With a flick of his hand, he scattered all the flower petals out. The flower petals twirled around in the air, like sharp blades. It sliced through the frost chi and shattered the ice crystals. A tumultuous colliding sound echoed. In the powerful explosion, the snowflakes shattered, and all the frost chi condensed within surged out. An ice disk shot out in all directions. Fengming used his folding fan to block it while Sheiji circulated her yuan chi to protect her body. However, the ice disk that blasted in all directions contained too much energy. A portion of it pierced through Sheiji and Fengming's protective yuan chi. Pang! Their protective yuan chi shattered and the two of them were sent flying back. They were covered in injuries as blood kept gushing out. They did not suffer very serious injuries, and with their cultivation levels, they could quickly stop the bleeding, but to be thrown back by 4 inconspicuous snowflakes in front of so many people, it was too humiliating. They were all extremely proud people, and held high posts in the Heavenly Dao Union. They were respected and idolized by many human elites, but today they had been defeated so badly. How could they accept that? How can she be so strong? Who is this girl? Sheiji's expression twisted. She refused to believe that there was first a Yi Yun who was triumphant in everything, but now, even a woman who seemed like a flower vase he brought around as a cultivation partner was so powerful. The white-dressed female's strength was not much weaker than Yi Yun. What was going on with this world? How could there be so powerful and unheard-of monsters that appeared so suddenly? Xiongqi, why are you standing there watching? Attack together! Sheiji said exasperatedly. Xiongqi was still in a daze. When he suddenly heard Sheiji's words, he immediately fell into a dilemma. He had not recovered from the internal injuries Jiang Xioro dealt to him. He could act like a fox assuming the majesty of a tiger, but if he really faced such a monster, he was completely incapable of fighting her. And all of you, snap out of it and quickly set up a formation. Sheiji exhorted the Heavenly Blood Union members. However, this exhortation caused quite a number of Heavenly Blood Union members to subconsciously take a step back. They felt fear even before the battle. They were already completely stunned by the power contained within Lin Shintone's 4 snowflakes. This woman was amazing. Her strength was completely unreasonable. They felt thankful that they did not charge forward recklessly, if not, they would probably already be corpses. The ice crystals could even injure Sheiji and Fengming, so if they had landed on them instead, they would definitely have been reduced to a griddle. Chapter 642, Blood of Gods. Upon seeing this scene, Fengming frowned. That bunch of trash would fall over each other when it came to benefits, but now, all of them started retreating at the first sign of trouble. However, Fengming knew clearly that it was pointless pinning his hopes on the Heavenly Blood Union members. They were not the white-dressed woman's match as the gap in strength was too great. Who is this woman? How can there be such a person in the Tianyuan world? Sheiji's eyes flashed coldly. The woman in front of her was dressed in white, and together with her sword, she looked like an inviolable fairy that had descended from the heavens. Her simple and elegant composure, as well as her being stronger than a reincarnator despite not being one, overwhelmed Sheiji with jealousy. She yearned to destroy Lin Shintone immediately. With that woman here, it's probably impossible for us to take down Jiang Xioro. The 6 reincarnators and the 100 Heavenly Blood Union members were likely no match for the white-dressed woman and slightly over 50 desolate race elites. Behind Lin Shintone was Jiang Xioro in her blood-red dress. Her face was pale and there was a smudge of red by the corner of her mouth. She looked like a beautiful flower that had bloomed in the eerie Seoul tomb. It was quite a saddening but beautiful scene. Jiang Shiro supported herself with the bone staff while looking at Lin Shintong's back. She was already prepared to fight to the death. She was unafraid of death, but she never expected that a couple would save her while she was at death's doorstep. The two of them were astounding people, a dragon and phoenix amongst people. Jiang Shiro did not recognize Lin Shintong, who was in front of her. But when she looked at the bow-wielding youth, she had a baffling sense of familiarity for some reason. She took a long while to recall, but the bow-wielding youth's aura was clearly very unfamiliar to her, completely not matching the one in her memory. "Who are you? Do I know the both of you?" Jiang Shiro questioned with a voice transmission. She was already greatly drained and wounded after using the sacred spirit's power twice, but she still remained calm. Lin Shintong sighed. Back when she met Yi Yun in the Cloud Wilderness, Jiang Shiro was just an ordinary girl in the Cloud Wilderness. But now, Jiang Shiro was becoming ever prettier, and she already had the bearing of a desolate queen. Such a peerless woman could be considered a perfect piece of art. Unfortunately, Blood Moon had treated her like prey. It was as if killing such a perfect and invaluable lady by beheading her was the greatest joy and achievement to them. "I think it's best for you to hear him tell you himself." Lin Shintong's gentle voice entered Jiang Shiro's ears. "Hear him tell me?" These words affirmed Jiang Shiro's belief that she knew this bow-wielding youth. Could it be? A thought arose in Jiang Shiro's mind, and it was this thought that made her heart stop beating for a moment. Jiang Shiro could not help but give Yi Yun a deep look. He had a completely unfamiliar appearance and completely alien aura, but that pair of eyes made her soul gently tremble. While Lin Shintong was fighting the reincarnators, Zhulong remained standing in the sealed enchantment while coldly looking at Yi Yun. It was as if the intense battle happening nearby had nothing to do with him. Outside, many people were looking at Zhulong and Yi Yun. The outcome of the battle between the two of them was of utmost importance. If Zhulong was no match for the combined forces of Yi Yun and that white-dressed woman, then it was no longer about receiving rewards for these Heavenly Blood Union members. It came down to them leaving here alive. These people had joined the Heavenly Blood Union for many years, and the fact that Zhulong was extremely powerful was entrenched in their hearts, but no one had seen Zhulong fight before, so they were unsure how powerful he really was. "You are very good." Zhulong suddenly said these words, causing no one to be able to guess his thoughts. "You deliberately schemed to enter the Heavenly Tao Union, not for the resources within, but to destroy the Heavenly Tao Union, right?" Zhulong's words resounded in the valley. Many Heavenly Blood Union members shuddered in fear when they heard this. Some of them had considered this point already. Jiang Yidao, who was about their age, was actually scheming against the martial alliance. How much ambition and strength was needed to accomplish this? Some people even suspected that Jiang Yidao was not even a young man, or it would be too terrifying. I would not say it was a deliberate scheme. It was one of the reincarnators amongst you who took the initiative to invite me to the Heavenly Tao Union. So I was just meeting one ruse with another. Yi Yun said sarcastically. There's no need to say any more nonsense. Make your move. Dong Sun Han is already dead, and you shall be next. The moment Yi Yun said that, killing intent surged from his body. He had a feud with the Blood Moon originally, and when he saw Jiang Shiro for the first time in so many years, Yi Yun's heart felt like it had been pierced. Jiang Shiro had been seriously injured in her battle with the Blood Moon, resulting in her having to burn her blood essence. You are really confident of yourself. Do you think you can definitely win? Zhulong shook his head as his fingers tapped lightly. In the void, space began to fluctuate, and a transparent crystal appeared out of thin air, just above Zhulong's palm. This crystal was lustrous, and right in the middle of the crystal, there was a dark red liquid that was sealed within. It was a drop of blood. The drop of blood was extremely heavy. It seemed to have a pulse, causing the core of the crystal to gently palpitate. Even the beams of light around it were slightly distorted by this drop of blood. That blood! Yi Yun's eyebrows pricked up. He could sense extremely powerful energy coming from the blood, and he even felt slightly disturbed. Zhulong lifted the crystal above his head as he admired the drop of blood. It was as if he was entranced by the drop of blood. He began muttering, "I have lived for many years. I was the first generation's blood moon. The demon disciple's power flow in my body. To all of you, the first generation of blood moon are no different from gods." Gods? Upon hearing this form of address, Yi Yun sneered, "What makes you think so?" Zhulong ignored Yi Yun's sarcasm as he stroked the crystal with his finger gently, splitting it into two. "This is the blood of gods. It's the most precious divine object in this world. There exist 4 drops now, and I happen to have one." Blood of gods? Yi Yun's heart shuddered. He naturally remembered hearing about the blood of gods that had appeared from the god burial abyss when he first came out of the great Empress mystic realm. Some people guessed that it was the blood of destruction that flowed out from the gigantic eye of destruction when the god burial abyss. The blood of destruction was being vied for by many factions in the Tian Yuan world, resulting in the destruction of small sects, causing blood to flow like rivers. Yi Yun had even heard of some news regarding the blood of destruction just before coming to the Soul Tomb. Regardless of the rumors or where the blood came from, most importantly, Yi Yun was able to confirm that there was an astonishing amount of energy coming from that drop of blood. At the same time, under Zhulong's control, the drop of blood floated towards the middle of his eyebrows. It seemed like he was about to absorb the drop of blood. Yi Yun's eyes flashed. Cha! A saber beam streaked across the dark sky, traversing thousands of feet, straight at Zhulong's head. He naturally did not wish to see Zhulong successfully absorb the strange drop of blood. Zhulong only lifted a hand in order to parry the saber strike. The black gloves he wore shimmered with a black glow. Following that, Zhulong used one hand to grab Yi Yun's saber strike. Both of their auras were terrifying as killing intent surged to the heavens. Boom! Yi Yun's saber clashed with Zhulong's hand. Silver light fractured, as black light shimmered. Even the sealed enchantment could not fully seal off the collision of Yuan Qi. The people nearby felt their hair stand as they could not help but retreat. Zhulong managed to ward off the saber strike, but just as the fractured saber beam dissipated, Zhulong's pupils constricted. Jiang Yidao had traversed the distance of 1,000 feet instantly, and he had appeared in front of him. Before his first saber's momentum was completely lost, his second saber strike had already arrived. Courting death. Zhulong boomed. The saber beam that was slashing at him was 10 times more blinding than the first one. Yi Yun's figure was in the saber beam. He did not put up any defenses. All he did was to press forward offensively. The saber truth, pressing forward with indomitable will. An offensive attack that pressed forward without any regard might have flaws, but if the saber was fast and powerful enough, then flaws would no longer be flaws. This was because the opponent would first need to fend off the saber before countering. The saber beam illuminated the valley. The dark clouds that filled the sky was slashed apart by the saber chi, revealing the bright blue sky. At this moment, quite a number of people could not help but think of the origins of Jiang Yidao's name. He never needed a second saber attack while killing others. Previously, no one had seen what it looked like if Jiang Yidao made a second strike. But now, against Zhulong, Jiang Yidao had slashed out a second and third saber strike. Chapter 643, Merging. Every attack of Yi Yun's was stronger than the previous ones. The bombardment was like surging waves, dispersing all the dark clouds as a result. There were golden beams filled with killing intent flaring everywhere in the sky. As he kept up his barrage of rapid attacks, Yi Yun's pupils constricted into vertical slits, resembling needles. He aimed at a certain spot of redness in the air, which was the floating drop of blood. With pure yang energy exploding, Yi Yun aimed at the red drop of blood and slashed at it. Ding! A crisp crack echoed as if space itself had been shattered. However, Yi-Yun was surprised to realize that he did not manage to split the drop of blood apart. Ha! Yi-Yun saw the drop of blood change shape slightly before returning to normal. He could sense a formidable force field surrounding that drop of blood. He had only struck the force field that was protecting the drop of blood. When energy was compressed to a certain limit, it would generate a force field, and it was this force field that Yi-Yun failed to split apart. The blood of gods is within my grasps, yet you think using such a method can prevent me from merging with the drop of blood? Such naivety. With a flick of his fingers, the drop of red blood flew towards the middle of Zhulong's eyebrows. Chi. The crackle of a raging inferno reverberated. The flesh on Zhulong's forehead quickly corroded after it came into contact with the drop of blood. Zhulong's facial muscles twitched violently as the drop of blood completely merged into his forehead. Boom! A violent energy blast was unleashed in all directions from the middle of Zhulong's eyebrows. The sealed enchantment also began to tremble violently as Yi-Yun was sent retreating. Yi-Yun could see traces of red blood spread out from the middle of Zhulong's eyebrows like a web. When his flesh merged with the emanating strands of blood, it slowly began to turn red and glow, as if it was burning in flames. The dark red flames quickly covered Zhulong's body as he suddenly roared like a primordial behemoth. The sound waves propagated outwards in a spherical waveform, visible to the naked eye. Layers of earth was lifted up by the shock wave, forming rolling waves of dirt that surged in an undulating manner. Wave after wave billowed into the sky, destroying everything in their path as they shook the mountains. When the shockwave gushed past the surrounding humans and desolate race warriors, they felt their organs twist in turmoil. Those who had lower cultivation levels immediately felt faint as they collapsed to the ground, blood flowing from their ears. However, those warriors who had collapsed to the ground from their injuries caused by the sound wave were not feeling unhappy. In fact, they were overjoyed. Young Master Zhulong. Young Master Zhulong has finally revealed his true strength. Zhulong, who had always held back, was well known to be powerful, so it was a sight to witness and understand his true strength. That blood of gods is rumored to be the blood bled by the Eye of Destruction within the eternal whirlpool. That Eye of Destruction occupies the entire god burial abyss. It's unimaginable what sort of entity that is. Young Master Zhulong's strength was unfathomable to begin with, and now having merged with the blood of gods, he probably would obtain a portion of energy from the Eye of Destruction. Even if it was just a tiny bit of energy, it coming from an existence like the Eye of Destruction already far exceeded their imaginations. It's been a while since I experienced this strength. Zhulong looked at his hands. The strands of blood on his body kept emanating towards his wrist and infusing into his black gloves. And on the 10 fingertips of the gloves, long claws popped out. It was Coldcast. Such nostalgia, Zhulong clenched his fists. After he merged with the blood of gods, his voice turned deep and heavy. Every word he said resonated with echoes. Firstly, when Zhulong said this, there was a burst of killing intent as he abruptly chopped with his palm. Swish! A crescent-shaped energy blade shot out from Zhulong's palm. The energy blade seemed to split the sky asunder, but its target was not Yi-Yun, nor was it Lin Shimtong, but the third inspector, which was also the masked man Yi-Yun was controlling. Ha! Yi-Yun's split-off consciousness was within the masked man's soul sea. When he saw the crescent-shaped energy blade coming towards him, he quickly turned serious, as he controlled his avatar to quickly retreat. However, Zhulong's attack was too fast. The energy blade contained terrifying killing intent that was completely locked onto the masked man. There was no chance for him to dodge, so he could only forcefully withstand that attack. The masked man flipped his hand and took out a white bone sickle from his interspatial ring. Before he could strike out with his sickle, it had already clashed with Zhulong's energy blade. Boom! The powerful aftershock caused the masked man to be sent flying backwards. A fiery rupture uproared from where the energy blade's tip met the ground, plowing open a huge chasm. Boom! The masked man crashed into the side of a mountain together with the crescent-shaped energy blade. The impact from the explosion sent chunks of boulders and avalanche down the mountainside. The masked man's arms fractured, while the white-bone sickle in his hand broke into two. The wanton energy sent a sickening jolt through his body. Several of his rib bones were broken. His mask had also fallen off, revealing a mangled, bloody face. Shintu Nanshan's body was not considered an excellent one. After Shintu Nantian was killed, it was first possessed by a inspector, then it was taken hold by the evil energy. With the various injuries from all his past battles, this body was already in ruins. Now with the fatal blow from Zhulong, the body was internally in a mess. It was completely maimed. In the masked man's soul sea, the split-off consciousness Yi Yun had left in it did not depart. He could sense the evil energy hidden within the masked man's soul sea growl and roar angrily. Although the evil energy lacked intelligence, it possessed instincts. With its habitat destroyed, it was naturally incensed. However, Yi Yun suppressed the evil energy, preventing it from charging outward. This evil energy was still in an inchoate state, so Yi Yun did not want it to be revealed in front of Zhulong. Zhulong was indeed powerful, and with him absorbing the strange blood of gods, it was difficult to estimate how strong he had become. The evil energy was still under the control of the purple crystal, so with an order from Yi Yun's consciousness, it fell dormant. As for Shintu Nanshan's body, it was completely in shambles. The body spat out large amounts of blood and organ bits. In the eyes of the human warriors, this body of Shintu Nantian was not going to live on further. Zhulong's single fatal blow at the third inspector made the crowd feel apprehensive. The masked man was a cruel and merciless person in the hearts of the Heavenly Blood Union members. He was the capricious administrator of the Heavenly Blood Union, yet now, he had been instantly disposed of by Zhulong. Had Zhulong already determined that the masked man was a traitor? Was he not afraid of making a mistake? This trash is being controlled by you? Zhulong said slowly as he looked at Yi Yun. Yi Yun was slightly stunned when he heard this. He never expected Zhulong to figure out the masked man's betrayal, much less his control of the masked man. Zhulong sneered and said, "You have concealed so much. With your strength, how can the third inspector have the ability to forcefully make you sign a soul contract? That itself is a problem. Furthermore, there is a faint spiritual connection between you and the third inspector." Zhulong was extremely perceptive. He may not have discovered the evil energy, but when Yi Yun used the purple crystal to control the evil energy, he had to use a bit of spiritual energy, and it was this tiny amount that Zhulong managed to detect. "I don't like people playing with puppets in front of me, and abhor a snake hidden amidst my men. The true third inspector has already been killed by you, right?" The third inspector was being controlled by Yi Yun? The Heavenly Blood Union members were rendered speechless from Zhulong's words. They found it difficult to believe that the feared third inspector, who always had an aura of austere gloominess, had been killed by Zhang Yidao and controlled as a puppet. Could it be that the actions of the third inspector towards the punishments, rewards and orders to the Heavenly Blood Union members were all Zhang Yidao's intentions? Who was this Zhang Yidao? How did he have such inconceivable abilities? Chapter 644, Yi Yun battles Zhulong. Senior Brother Jiang had managed to take control of the third inspector when he was pursuing us. We thought Senior Brother Jiang had succumbed to the third inspector, but it was the third inspector who became Senior Brother Zhang's puppet. Wei Chiwei recollected the sequences of the masked man's pursuit of them. The surging killing intent emitted by the masked man when he chased after them was not something that could be faked. There was no need for Yi Yun to have done that. Later on, they were sealed in the large array, with their perception cut off. It prevented them from knowing anything that happened outside. When they came out, they received news that Yi Yun had signed a soul contract. Furthermore, Yi Yun got them to sign the soul contract too. From the looks of it, Yi Yun had managed to gain control of the masked man outside the seal. How did Jiang Yidao have the means to control a top expert? Senior brother Jiang had long controlled the masked man, so he must have tampered with the soul contract. No wonder he can ignore the soul contract now. From the looks of it, the soul contract we signed is also fake. Wei Chiwei and company realized this and heaved a sigh of relief. They could not escape from the soul contract once it was signed. Could the person who saved us be the inspector controlled by senior brother Jiang? The Chu sisters looked at the devastated body of the masked man, which was covered in black blood. Recalling that sinister aura, it was indeed no different from the masked man. The third inspector was killed in one move, depicting the great increase in strength Zhulong received after absorbing the blood of destruction. At this moment, Zhulong was hovering in the sky as his aura constantly increased. His muscles swelled up as his joints cracked with explosive sounds. Imperceptibly, Zhulong's body had grown in height, making him taller than Yi Yun by a head. A dark red blood trace spread out from the middle of his eyebrows, like channels that circled all around his body. He looked like a lofty mountain that could not look straight at. He was high and mighty, as his aura suppressed everyone. That chess piece of yours has been settled by me. Next, it shall be you. After he finished speaking, Zhulong suddenly moved. His aura recessed as the heaven-earth yuan qi in 100-mile radius rumbled. So, Zhulong traversed a distance of 1,000 feet in an instant and punched at Yi Yun. This was his first meaningful attack. All the eyes of the Heavenly Blood Union members lit up. As long as Zhulong beat Jiang Yidao, then they could easily overcome and wipe out the desolate race members. The echo from the explosive sound caused their skin to turn numb. And before they were cognizant of their physiological response, Zhulong had already appeared in front of Yi Yun. It was too fast. At that instant, the space around Yi Yun was receding, forming a spatial cage that trapped Yi Yun within. Zhulong possessed power that far exceeded anyone Yi Yun had previously met. This was the power brought forth from the blood of gods? Clang! Yi Yun brandished his saber, as all of his yuan qi exploded. Behind Yi Yun, a black 9 neonate phantom image appeared. The 9 heads roared at the heavens. With his aspect totem conjured, and through the augmentation of the pure yang powers with the great Empress Heart Sutra as a foundation, the 9 neonate totem imbued itself in the ancient dust saber, and was shot out by Yi Yun's slash. Roar! The 9 neonate roared and collided with Zhulong's fist. In the overwhelming explosion, the ancient dust saber vibrated violently. The pressure dealt to the ancient dust saber was not something it could withstand. The saber was obtained by Yi Yun from the Heavenly Blood Union's treasury. Although it was not some peerless divine weapon, it was still a top weapon in the Tian Yuan world. However, there were signs that the saber was failing to withstand Zhulong's immense strength. Ka-cha! The ancient dust saber was grabbed by Zhulong. While wearing the black glove, his 5 sharp claws lodged onto the ancient dust saber's blade tip. Without a doubt, the black glove was a supreme-grade treasure whose quality far exceeded Yi Yun's ancient dust saber. G. The ancient dust saber issued a series of twisting metal sounds, as if the saber was about to be forcefully ripped apart by Zhulong. This amount of strength was terrifying. This is your strength? Zhulong laughed wantonly. As his face was covered in strands of bloodlines, it made his smile look extremely ferocious. Break! Zhulong tightened his grip, but at this moment, Yi Yun infused all his yuan qi into the ancient dust saber, causing the saber to become as hard as divine metal. The saber truth, pressing forward with indomitable will. Cha! The ancient dust saber was pulled out. As it rubbed across Zhulong's black gloves, it emitted an ear-piercing screech. A saber's solidness not only depended on the saber's material, it also depended on the saber-bearer's strength and his insight into the saber Dao. Yi Yun had forcefully used his own strength to preserve the ancient dust saber. He managed to retreat with his saber intact. Upon seeing this scene, Zhulong was first slightly stunned before he sneered. Although he failed to break the ancient dust saber, the blade tip had been damaged. The saber was supported by Yi Yun's saber intent. Once Yi Yun's saber intent weakened, the saber would also shatter. However, how could Yi Yun ensure his saber intent would constantly be strong against Zhulong's powerful attacks? Die! Zhulong shouted as he charged towards Yi Yun. His traversing was accompanied by a whistling thunder. Zhulong made a second punch which was much more powerful and terrifying than the first. Yi Yun's surroundings once again sealed him a spatial prison, preventing Yi Yun from evading. As Yi Yun saw the punch reach him, he focused and became one with the saber. Break! Ka-cha! The spatial prison was forcefully slashed open by Yi Yun. He flew out with his saber, while Zhulong's punch followed, punching into thin air. Boom! Like a meteorite crashing to the ground, a mountain 100 meters away experienced the brunt of the shockwave from Zhulong's punch. The 10,000 feet tall mountain rumbled. Its middle cratered from the immense shockwave, leaving behind a gigantic punch mark. Next, the mountain began to collapse as rocks rolled down, while a plume of dust sprung up, covering the sky. The gigantic mountain collapsed with a tumultuous boom, causing the ground to quake as a result. Warriors, who were watching from afar, were stunned seeing this. The Soul Tomb's environment was special. The rocks here had been nourished by the Yin aura over the tens of millions of years, making the rocks here much harder than those outside. However, a mountain composed of such rocks had collapsed under Zhulong's punch. And his punch did not even strike the mountain. There was a distance of 100 meters separating them. If it was a person who had bore the brunt of the strike, what would be that person's outcome? It probably was not enough to describe him as perishing utterly. Too powerful. If Jian Yidao is hit by a punch, the outcome would be obvious. The Heavenly Blood Union members felt their blood boil from watching this. Who could withstand such power? What could Jian Yidao do? He might have heaven-defying talent, but he was far from a reincarnator who had lived several incarnations. If they had strength similar to Zhulong, how liberating would that be? If they mastered the Heavenly Dao reincarnation grand technique, then their strengths would also increase multifold. Even if they were not as strong as Zhulong, as long as they had 5 to 10% of his strength, it was enough. Chapter 645, Torch Dragon vs. Golden Crow. You broke open my spatial prison? Zhulong looked down at Yi Yun while hovering high in the sky. He was not bothered that Yi Yun had managed to dodge his second punch. You are very fast, unfortunately, in my area of influence, speed is meaningless. If you want to defeat me, you need to be able to withstand the pressure from my area of influence, and face me head-on. If not, defeating me is an impossibility. As Zhulong spoke, countless black bolts of lightning circulated in the surrounding space. Zhulong and Yi Yun were previously enclosed within a large sealed enchantment for their fight, but now, the enchantment was beginning to shrink. With the enchantment shrinking, its intensity also grew stronger. Slowly, Yi Yun could sense the surrounding space around him turn viscous. The space seemed to begin possessing mass. The heavy space permeated the surroundings, resulting in beams of light to be distorted when they crossed this space. Oh! This is... Yi Yun was surprised. He spread his perception out, but there was nothing around him. Are you surprised? Zhulong opened up his arms as he indulged himself in the viscous space. He seemed to be lord of this space, or he was in control of everything. An absolute void is not necessarily devoid of matter. Space itself is a formation of energy. It can dominate and create life, and it could also dominate and annihilate. When it is condensed to an extremity, it would distort. It would restrain everything within it like gravity, preventing anything from escaping. This is just a very small aspect of spatial dimension laws. Spatial dimension laws were extremely mysterious to Tian Yuan world warriors. Canonized material that described space and time were hard to come by, but from hearing what Zhulong had to say today, the Heavenly Blood Union members present felt their hearts palpitate. Such a mysterious power made their blood boil. Zhulong's power was already terrifying enough. He had the physical strength to twist and break a treasured weapon of the Tian Yuan world, and was well versed in spatial dimension laws. He was the epitome of invincibility. Even Yi Yun found this spatial area of influence extremely mysterious, much less the Tian Yuan world warriors. He still had a long path ahead, so fighting against experts who were similar in strength as he was greatly aided his growth. With space already sealed, how are you to dodge this time? Zhulong's energy began to combust. The energy on his body surface presented itself as gray flames. As the flames gathered behind Zhulong, it slowly formed a black coiled dragon. The black dragon revealed its teeth and brandished its claws, while emitting a deep growl. This black dragon's scales, claws and beard were extremely lifelike, as if it was a real black dragon. This was a torch dragon, which was also Zhulong's aspect totem. Zhulong, who had conjured his aspect totem, increased his strength several-fold. Heaven incinerating dragon's inferno. Zhulong punched out, while the torch dragon phantom image behind him imbued itself into his fist. The grayish-black inferno consumed the surroundings like plumes of dark clouds gathered together, torching the heaven and earth. Yi Yun was fully focused to take on this punch. As the space around him became more viscous and twisted, it made it impossible for Yi Yun to evade Zhulong's attack. Yi Yun roared as the 9 neonate aspect totem behind him augmented itself into his body, allowing his strength to instantly increase. The saber truth, one with the saber. Phew! The saber blade forcefully broke open the distorted space, while also sending a saber beam that was like 100 feet wide golden waterfall that slashed downwards at Zhulong's fist. Ka-cha! An intense collision erupted as two terrifying shockwaves merged together to form a violent stormy blast. This blast was compressed within the twisted space, and grew in strength as it was being compressed. Just like the air that was being forcefully compressed in a balloon, it finally exploded when it reached its limits. Boom! The distorted space was largely dissipated as a spherical shockwave shot out. Yi Yun felt a tremendous force hit him like he was being hit in the chest by a mountain. He felt a sharp pain in his organs as he was sent flying backwards. Ding! With a crisp sound, a series of blue frost-like patterns began appearing in the middle of the saber in Yi Yun's hands, before it shattered. As he experienced the powerful impact, Yi Yun was no longer able to use his saber intent to preserve the ancient dust saber. As such, his saber reached the end of its life. First I'll destroy your saber, then I'll take your life. In the stormy blast, Zhulong roared with laughter. The torch dragon phantom image behind him roared and charged at Yi Yun. A torch dragon was a legendary divine beast that could create seasonal winds just by breathing. As for the torch dragon aspect totem condensed by Zhulong, it naturally was not a result of condensing a divine beast's beast mark, but his aspect totem still possessed the powerful stance of a divine beast. As Yi Yun was sent retreating by the shock wave, the torch dragon aspect totem rushed after him. Unfortunately, Yi Yun had just attacked, causing his Yuan Qi to greatly weaken. Furthermore, his ancient dust saber had already shattered. Ka. The space behind Yi Yun began to coagulate, sealing off any room for Yi Yun's retreat. This gave him no choice but to face Zhulong's aspect totem directly. Die! Zhulong's killing intent was surging, and his strike was not something Yi Yun could dodge at all. As the torch dragon widely opened its mouth to devour Yi Yun, he decided to abandon the shortened ancient dust saber. He leveled his arms as he used his chest to directly meet the strike. This pose was undoubtedly suicidal. Oh? Have you succumbed to your fate? Just as this thought arose in the minds of everyone, they suddenly heard a sharp screech emit from Yi Yun's body. A reddish-gold firebird flew out from Yi Yun's chest, charging straight at the torch dragon totem. This firebird's wingspan was more than 100 feet wide. It was covered in fiery feathers and had 3 legs. It was a 3-legged golden crow. After cultivating the Great Empress Heart Sutra, Yi Yun's pure yang laws had improved greatly. This also caused his Golden Crow aspect totem to completely remold itself. Its power was completely different from the past. A torch dragon and a golden crow. The two powerful aspect totems danced in the air and clashed at each other without any gaudy display. Boom! This impact far exceeded the Yuan Qi storm blast that had previously been compressed to its limits. Under this jarring impact, the sealed enchantment Zhulong set up trembled violently. There were even terrifying blast waves that tore off a portion of the enchantment, piercing outwards like sharp swords. They numbered more than 10, and these blast waves contained unimaginable power as a result of being highly compressed. "Careful!" someone exclaimed. However, it was too late, because the blast waves were too fast. In the instant they saw it, it had already streaked towards the horizons. An unlucky human warrior had his body pierced through by a blast wave. Pwah! Chapter 646, No More Hiding. An aspect totem was a warrior's trademark. Although not every warrior's aspect totem was different in form from another's, it would not be easy to find warriors who had similar aspect totems, unless they cultivated in similar cultivation techniques, had similar physiques and condensed the same beast marks. The aspect totem behind Yi Yun was a three-legged golden crow, which was a very rare aspect totem in the Tian Yuan world. It was nearly synonymous with being Yi Yun's personal trademark. Today, Yi Yun's conjuration of the golden crow aspect totem naturally caused Zhulong to make the connection. The chaotic blobs of light slowly dissipated within the sealed enchantment as Yi Yun's figure entered the crowd's vision. He was hovering in midair, his clothes now slightly tattered. Other than that, there was nothing different about him. Even the compressed, violent blast within the sealed enchantment had failed to injure Yi Yun. Zhulong narrowed his eyes as he stared at Yi Yun, as if he was trying to penetrate Yi Yun with his gaze. The golden crow aspect totem alone was not enough to confirm that Zhang Yidao was Yi Yun, but with Zhang Yidao being a peerless genius as well, there was pretty much no doubt about it. As for the white-dressed woman accompanying Yi Yun, it was beyond all doubt that she was Lin Xintong. So it is the two of you. Yi Yun. Lin Xintong. No wonder the two of you would save the desolate race's devils. What a joke! Zhulong's words resounded in the ears of many Heavenly Blood Union members, causing all of them to fall stunned. Zhang Yidao was Yi Yun? In fact, a number of them had already made the connection when they saw the golden crow aspect totem. Zhulong's words just confirmed their speculations. It really is Yi Yun. Yi Yun, who was in reclusive training in the Great Empress Mystic Realm, came out this fast. And his strength was so ridiculously strong after emerging? Who knew that Zhang Yidao would be Yi Yun? Zhang Yidao's bone age was 26, while Yi Yun is actually about 22 years old, younger than Zhang Yidao. To have such strength at 22 years old made people of the same age despair. Just looking at Yi Yun's back would cause them to lose the confidence to walk on the path of martial arts. If he combined forces with Lin Xintong, would there be anyone in the entire Tian Yuan world who could stop them in another decade? So what if he is strong? He does not know how to endure and hide. He will still die. If he hid in the Great Empress Mystic Realm, no one could have done anything to him, but now, with him emerging, how can the Martial Alliance spare him? He was forced to use his golden crow aspect totem in the Soul Tomb, revealing his identity. Even if he manages to escape from Lord Zhulong, he will definitely be doomed once the news spreads when we leave the Soul Tomb. Many of the Heavenly Blood Union members present yearn for Yi Yun to die. Yi Yun's inheriting the ancient Great Empress inheritance made them jealous. And now, with his strength being so ridiculous, not only was he invincible amongst people his age, even people from the older generation might not be able to beat him. If such a genius peer did not die, they would suffer from the pressure dealt to them. Furthermore, Yi Yun had betrayed the human race by submitting to the desolate race, giving them a reason to punish him. So it is that traitor. I was wondering why a human would save the desolate race devils. This sort of person should be brought back to the Martial Alliance and have his cultivation maimed, and then suffer death from a dismembered heart. His corpse should be hung on in the Martial Alliance's square and paraded. After Yi Yun's identity was revealed, many Heavenly Blood Union members yearned for Yi Yun to be immediately killed. However, on the other side of the battlefield, under the blood moon, Jiang Xiao, who was dressed in red, had tears streaming down her face. "Yuner, it really is you," Jiang Xiao muttered to herself. Having been separated for a decade, they ended up meeting in the perennially dark Soul Tomb, facing the blood moon with their lives on the line. It was quite a regretful feeling. Seeing the tears in Jiang Xiao's eyes, Lin Xintong empathized with her. When she met Yi Yun in the Cloud Wilderness, she clearly understood the living environment in the Cloud Wilderness. It was imaginable how deep their feelings for each other was as a pair of siblings who had relied on each other in the Cloud Wilderness. "Miss Xiao, your body is still weak. It is best if you meditate and try to recover. Do not be too agitated, as you do not need to worry about Yi Yun." "Thank you, Miss Lin." Jiang Xiao and Lin Xintong knew of each other, but they had never met prior to this. Today was the first time they met. Both had close relationships with Yi Yun, and were equally peerless in beauty. Having his identity revealed was something Yi Yun had already expected. He never planned on hiding his identity within the Soul Tomb. He decided to refrain from disguising himself, and immediately removed the Star Transference Heaven Changing Book. Immediately, Yi Yun's face flashed as his body began to grow taller. His joints began to crack as his facial muscles began to shrink, causing his facial features to turn more handsome and his eyes brighter. In just a few seconds, Yi Yun returned to his original looks, transforming into a handsome youth who had an extraordinary bearing. He is Yi Yun. He does look like the portrait in the wanted poster, but there is something different. The wanted poster might have drawn Yi Yun's facial features, but many of the details in the portrait had been drawn to purposely uglify Yi Yun, making him look like a despicable person. Now, however, when they saw Yi Yun in person, when matching his strength and bearings to his facial features, it gave them a feeling of looking at a hero of orthodox origin, a dragon amongst men. Even many of Yi Yun's enemies could not help but admit that such a youth was definitely the best outstanding talent in the Tian Yuan world. "It really is you." "That's right, I should have long guessed that it could only be you." As Zhulong looked at Yi Yun, the blood traces on his body shimmered, as if blood was flowing from the middle of his eyebrows and into the surroundings. "There was really no effort wasted in searching for you. You could have safely remained in reclusive training in the Great Empress Mystic Realm for decades, or even a century. Although long periods of reclusivity could hinder your martial path, it would be better than lacking in strength now and being killed by me. Since you have emerged, how can I let down such a grand gift? Today, your life, as well as the inheritance you inherited, shall all be mine." As Zhulong spoke, his body surged with Yuan Qi, causing his long hair to stand up in the Yuan Qi tempest. Around him, space began to condense and distort again. The sealed enchantment, which had more than 10 pierced holes due to the blast waves, were mended and grew in strength. From afar, people could clearly see the boundary of the sealed enchantment. It was like a gigantic black eggshell, and everything within it seemed to be isolated in its own unknown spacetime. Ka! Zhulong clenched his fists, the sounds of his knuckles cracking under the black gloves resounding. "My fist has already broken your saber. Next, I shall break your spine." Yi Yun only faintly smiled while facing the black fist Zhulong had lifted up. With a flip of his hand, a rusty broken sword appeared in his palm. "Cut the crap, make your move." Translator's notes, less than 50,000 views for another free chapter. Chapter 647, Yi Yun's Sword. Sword? Upon seeing the rusty, broken sword in Yi Yun's hand, Zhulong chuckled. He naturally knew that Yi Yun dual cultivated in both sabers and swords, and that he also knew archery. He even knew that Yi Yun had a crappy, broken sword. Back during the trials of the Great Empress Mystic Realm, Yi Yun had used the broken sword to kill Shen Tunantian. All of this had naturally been described by the young elites that left the Great Empress Mystic Realm. Yi Yun's strength was too strong amongst the young elites present in the Great Empress mystic realm, so they were extremely shocked about it. However, a reincarnator like Zhulong did not find it remarkable when he listened to their description. Reincarnators had reincarnated many times, so their pride was extremely high, so how would it be easy for juniors to strike fear into their hearts? Your saber was exchanged from the Martial Alliance's treasury, and has already been broken by a single punch from me. As for your sword. Is that your sword? Zhulong looked disdainfully at the broken sword in Yi Yun's hand. He would not have belittled a weapon taken out by Yi Yun. He had previously guessed that the broken sword must have been obtained by Yi Yun in the Great Empress mystic realm, but today, he realized that the sword lacked any luster, and had even rusted. Zhulong had lived for many years, so he had extensive knowledge and experience. He was confident of his judgment. He believed that he could identify what was extraordinary when it came to treasures, despite its age. However, Zhulong did not think highly of the sword in Yi Yun's hand. A peerless divine weapon might lose its luster, but it was impossible for it to rust. Even if a divine weapon broke and lost a lot of its spirituality, the weapon's material should still be top grade. Such materials should remain lustrous, despite the passage of millions of years, so it should not look so unbearably bad. For example, the black glove on Zhulong's hands was named Heaven's Punishment. It came from an abyss world, different from the Tian Yuan world. It had existed for so long that it had been forgotten. It even exceeded Blood Moon's own history. Over such a long period of time, Heaven's Punishment still contained extremely powerful energy. As for Yi Yun's broken sword, it was completely not up to par. For the sword to be in such an old and terrible state, it meant that Yi Yun's sword must have experienced a devastating attack, causing the materials to destroyed, resulting in it rusting due to not being able to bear the passage of time. No matter how powerful an ancient treasure was, if its materials were destroyed, then it would be no different from scrap metal. An abandoned ancient treasure picked up in the Great Empress mystic realm was probably useful against trash like Shintu Nantian. However, it definitely could not withstand a blow in front of him. It was simply courting death to use such an ancient treasure to fight against him. I will break your sword, along with your body. Yuan Energy Battle Embodiment. The distorted space around Zhulong compressed once again, as it formed a layer on his body's surface. Gravity, space and energy mixed together, forming a force field that clung closely to Zhulong's body. Oh! This is... Yi Yun was slightly surprised. He had never before seen such divine techniques as those employed by Zhulong. It was completely different from the field Yi Yun had cultivated in. The path of martial arts had 3,000 great Dao, with numerous variations amongst the laws. The force field tremored, forming silk-thin, gray-colored flames which rose up from Zhulong's body. His strength and aura constantly increased, resulting in an augmentation that exceeded 20%. Yi Yun could tell that this was a combination of a mystic technique and laws that caused the strength augmentation. Blood Moon was an ancient organization, and in fact, the core of Blood Moon, which was labeled as the first-generation Blood Moon, only had 3 people. They were the actual overseers of Blood Moon, and Zhulong was one of them. The best resources of Blood Moon as well as the best inheritance, which accumulated for tens of millions of years, were only used by these 3. The other people, be they reincarnators or inspectors, were just their subordinates who served them. For example, Zhulong's attainment in spatial dimension laws far exceeded that of any other reincarnator. The main reason was because Zhulong had previously obtained a realm stone. A realm stone was a foundation rock of a world. A small world's existence has its foundation, which was a realm stone. It was the core of a small world. Zhulong had managed to refine a small world's realm stone, causing his understanding of spatial dimensional laws to reach a terrifying level. Dragon Indra Overlord Blood. Zhulong punched out, as his speed reached his limits. From the beginning of his battle with Yi Yun, every attack of Zhulong's was stronger than the previous one. Yi Yun faced his attacks seriously, without being careless in any way. With the broken sword in hand, the shocking sword scar he saw at the Pyongyang Sword Palace appeared in his mind. Kill! Yi Yun slashed out with his sword. Behind him, the Golden Crow and the Nine Neonate flew up, merging into the sword beam. Sword beams torrented down, destroying anything in its path. The void that had turned distorted and viscous around Yi Yun was torn apart as the broken sword penetrated through it, stabbing straight at Zhulong's fist. Zhulong was wearing Heaven's Punishment on his hand. Treasures like gloves were extremely difficult to forge. Heaven's Punishment was definitely one of the best treasures in Blood Moon's armory. The glove-wearing fist seemed like a black hole as it absorbed all the surrounding light. As for Yi Yun's broken sword, it was dark and lacked luster. "I will break your sword and your arm." Zhulong roared as his first hit the broken sword. Boom! The distorted space began to ripple, Yuan Qi shooting out in all directions. Wherever they hit, they would open large chasms in the ground or cleave off tall mountains. The Heavenly Blood Union members present had all retreated in shock. Thanks to the previous dozen blast waves, which killed a Heavenly Blood Union member, they had already pulled back. If they had not, there would now be a greater death and injured count. Zhulong's expectation of his fist blowing through Yi Yun and his sword did not happen when they made the resounding contact. Instead, he felt a tremendous force pass through his arm. The broken sword was unimaginably hard. No matter how good a treasured glove was, it was still soft. So in a head-on clash, how could it beat a sword? Ka-cha! With a crisp crack, Zhulong's expression changed. He felt an excruciating pain coming from his hand. His right finger joints had fractured during the impact. How could that be? Fracturing a finger bone was a trivial wound to a warrior, as it could be recovered in a day or two. However, in an intense battle, who would give one the time to heal? Zhulong's heart sank, for he could not believe that the broken sword in Yi Yun's hand was a divine sword. Despite the sword having rusted, which was a trademark of destroyed pieces of metal, how could it be so powerful? During that instant, Zhulong did not have the time to ponder over it carefully. With a twirl of his body, Yi Yun slashed his broken sword at Zhulong's neck. As his sword slashed forward, it ignited endless Pyongyang flames in the void between them. Courting death! Zhulong angrily growled as he waved his left hand, grabbing Yi Yun's sword. By wearing Heaven's Punishment, holding a saber or sword was a trivial thing. However, when Zhulong grabbed Yi Yun's sword, a searing pain was inflicted on his palm. The sword seemed like it was going to split his palm apart. Chapter 648, Alternate Dimension Tomb. What sort of sword is this? Despite wearing Heaven's Punishment, it was still not enough to withstand the sharpness of the sword. A sword's sharpness was not only determined by the sword's physical sharpness, it also depended on the sword intent contained within the sword. Some ancient divine swords could only have their sword intents sealed when placed in a scabbard. The moment it was drawn out of the scabbard, just a look at the sword could be enough to inflict injuries on someone, despite not touching its blade. This nameless ancient sword was as such. For someone to use his hand to grab the blade of a sword of that would reign sovereign amongst swords, it was an act of blasphemy towards the ancient sword. Without needing Yi Yun to power it with his Yuan Qi, the ancient sword automatically began to vibrate, and the sword intent condensed within it surged out. Despite being separated by Heaven's Punishment, Zhulong's palm was slashed by the sword intent. Gashes forming as blood turned his palm crimson. What? Zhulong's expression changed. His left hand subconsciously released the sword like a mortal touching a hot surface. At this moment, Yi Yun's hand suddenly jerked, pulling the broken sword away. Sha! The sword's blade slid across Zhulong's palm as sword intent shot out in all directions. With a sudden vibration, the black glow from Heaven's Punishment lost its luster. Zhulong's left hand was trembling. Underneath Heaven's Punishment, his hand's tendons and bones had all been severed. And at this moment, Yi Yun raised his sword again. On the ancient broken sword, the specks of rust began to emit a faint glow. These rust specks was actually the blood of a bronze ancient god, which had stained the broken sword. The bronze ancient god's blood had merged with the sword, and with the passage of time, the sword had turned into its present state. The rust itself was not a mark of the metal being destroyed, but was a container of the immense power and laws stored within the blood. Yun's present realm was still insufficient for him to use the laws contained within, but it was still enough for him to be able to dominate in the Tianyuan world. As he slashed out, the sword whistled towards Zhulong. Sword beams spewed out, tearing open the distorted void. As Zhulong saw the sword blade approaching him, he no longer dared to use his hand to block it. With a roar, his Yuan energy battle embodiment was pushed to its limits, causing a visible curtain of black light to form on the surface of his body. At the same time, Zhulong retreated rapidly. Pang! The broken sword slashed onto Zhulong's protective, black light membrane and shattered it immediately. The wanton sword winds created from the slash tore apart the chest armor Zhulong was wearing. Zhulong was sent flying backwards, like a kite with a broken thread, but Yun did not give Zhulong the chance to make any alterations. With the broken sword in hand, he chased after Zhulong. As sword beams shot forward, they constantly tore apart the distorted void that curbed Yun's speed. The broken sword clung tightly onto Zhulong, as every attack stabbed at Zhulong's throat. As Zhulong retreated, he endured the pain coming from his hand and punched out. Torch Dragon's 9 Death Punches. Zhulong punched out 9 times, the force from his fist exploding midair. However, he no longer dared to make contact with the strange broken sword. Zhulong, who did not dare to fight head-on and had injuries on his hands, was forced into retreat by Yun. Boom! While retreating, Zhulong smashed into a mountain behind him, causing the 1,000-foot mountain to turn into smithereens. As rubble scattered around like a wanton storm, Zhulong charged out from within the rubble, his hair disheveled. Yun chased straight after him and loudly said, "Did you not say that, in your spatial area of influence, if I do not fight you head-on, I would definitely lose? Now, despite me fighting you head-on, you constantly escape. It's so boring." Yun showed no mercy as he ridiculing Zhulong by using his own words from before, smacking his face directly. Yun was using this method to force Zhulong to face him head-on. Despite being able to break open the distorted space with the broken sword, Yun would still be slowed down in the spatial area of influence. It prevented him from perfectly using Golden Crow Sun Shift, making it very difficult for him to kill Zhulong. Yun's derision made a vein pop up on Zhulong's forehead, but he did not lose his mind because of Yun. He was very clear-minded. The broken sword was too odd. If he used a long-range weapon, he could still put up a fight, but with the heaven's punishment. This sort of weapon for empty fists was restraining him too much. Since he could not directly parry the attacks, how was he to defeat Yun? Zhulong suppressed his embarrassment and carried on dodging Yun's sword, but in the eyes of the Heavenly Blood Union members, it was a completely different matter. All they saw was Zhulong being chased by Yun as he was being beaten up. He looked pathetic. This made all the Heavenly Blood Union members stare on with eyes widened and mouths open. In their hearts, Zhulong was synonymous with undefeatable. He represented the mysteriousness and invincibility of the Martial Alliance. However, now, the redoubtable figure they worshipped was being suppressed so badly by a junior like Yun. They were jealous and furious at Yun, wishing for him to be maimed of his cultivation, then tortured to death, with his corpse strung up for all to see. However, the anticipated scene of Zhulong crippling Yun did not happen. Instead, the human race's traitor was close to crippling Zhulong. Some of the meticulous human warriors had already discovered that the way Zhulong clenched his fist looked unnatural. This implied that Zhulong's hand was probably injured, and his injuries were likely quite severe. If Zhulong was defeated by Yun, what would happen to them? To keep things under wraps, Yun would probably silence all of them. Just thinking of this made many of them panic. Some people were considering escaping, but the Soul Tomb, it was a completely sealed space. Escaping? It was easier said than done. Furthermore, there was also Lin Shintone guarding by the side. This white-dressed woman's strength would definitely exceed their imaginations. Pang! When Zhulong could no longer retreat, he broke through the sealed enchantment's boundary. The black membrane shattered. Once out of the spatial force field, the distorted space would no longer be an obstacle to Yi Yun's speed. Then Yi Yun's ability to chase would definitely increase several-fold. With the Golden Crow Sun Shift movement technique, Zhulong, who was not adept at speed, was definitely no match for Yi Yun. Meet your end. Yi Yun knew deeply that it was because Zhulong had underestimated him was the reason why he ended up receiving those injuries to his hand. And to a fist user, having his hands injured meant losing a large portion of his combat ability. Taking advantage of a situation was Yi Yun's battle principle. Sword beams appeared once again as the 2-foot-long, broken sword stabbed straight at Zhulong's heart. And at this moment, Yi Yun, who was flying forward from the sword's momentum, felt his body suddenly sink. The space surrounding him coagulated again as a strong suction force began to tug at his body, causing him to slow down. Oh! What? Yi Yun's heart sank. At this moment, he saw the red blood traces that emanated all over Zhulong's body seem to burn once again. His eyes were now bloodshot, as if he had used a mystic technique. The spatial restrictive force was too powerful, preventing Yi Yun from easily escaping it. You have really infuriated me. Even if I have to hurt my cultivation level, I will annihilate you. I shall let you witness the ultimate profoundness of the spatial dimension laws I cultivate. Alternate Dimension Tomb. Zhulong flew upwards in anger as a dark spatial door appeared out of nowhere behind Yi Yun. It slowly opened, and within the spatial door was a void of emptiness. No one knew where it led to. The immense suction force came from the spatial door, restricting Yi Yun. Chapter 649, The Devouring Spatial Dimension. This universe contained countless numbers of spatial dimensions. Some of these spatial dimensions could give rise to great worlds, allowing all sorts of sentient life to mature vibrantly in it. However, there were spatial dimensions that were empty and desolate. These dimensions only contained endless amounts of rubble and dust. They were as quiet as cemeteries. Zhulong's alternate dimension tomb was such a dead spatial dimension. After finding it, he had seared its location into his dantian, allowing for him to use spatial dimension laws to open up a tunnel to this space. By sucking an enemy into it, the enemy would forever be stuck in this alternate dimension, floating around endlessly, until his death. However, it was extremely difficult for Zhulong to open this spatial tunnel with his abilities. He needed to use a mystic technique that would harm his body in order to accomplish it. Behind Yi Yun, the spatial door to the void grew in size. It was like a primordial desolate beast's gigantic mouth, opening up to swallow Yi Yun. Yi Yun felt himself being grappled by numerous tentacles of invisible energy, as if his body was stuck in a quicksand, preventing him from easily moving. This move. Yi Yun's heart sank as he used the Great Empress Heart Sutra, burning pure Yang Yuan Qi within his body. Phew! With a wave of his hand, a flaming rope, formed from pure Yang Yuan Qi, shot out. It tore through empty space like a sharp arrow before twirling itself around a large mountain. However, just the instant it took to do so was enough to let the flaming rope break through the mountain, due to the immense suction. A gigantic mountain was torn into two by the flaming rope. Shoo! 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 Dozens of flaming ropes shot out from Yi Yun's body. Some wrapped themselves around gigantic mountains, while others shot into the ground. Every flaming rope gave Yi Yun the ability to resist. With his absolute strength, Yi Yun forcefully resisted the suction force from the alternate dimension tomb. He barely managed to withstand its power. Yi Yun was secretly alarmed by Zhulong's attack. Spatial dimension laws were indeed profound and intricate, and it was surprising for such a move to exist. The alternate dimension tomb fell short of fully devouring Yi Yun. And that tiny bit of resistance was enough to cause a fatal blow. This was because Zhulong could not withstand using this force for long. Once he failed to hold out, he would lose completely. Seeing the two parties in a stalemate, the Heavenly Blood Union members turned nervous. They were afraid of Zhulong losing to Yi Yun. As for the other side, Jiang Xioro felt her heart race even faster. She looked unblinkingly at Yi Yun. She did not know how she could carry on surviving if something happened to Yi Yun now after reuniting with him after a decade. And at this moment, from a mountain peak far away, Lin Xintong flew up. Although she believed Yi Yun was likely to endure longer than Zhulong, she could not tolerate the word likely. She wanted to deny any possibility for Yi Yun succumbing to an incident. If the two of them were battling, and Yi Yun suffered a heavy blow, it would just be an injury. However, if he was sucked into the alternate dimension, then she could not guarantee that Yi Yun would be able to return. Lin Xintong brandished her sword, causing ice blue yuan qi to emanate out like a mist from within her body, blanketing the surroundings. The vapor in the air froze up, forming numerous blue ribbons. Lin Xintong was about to make her move. When the Heavenly Blood Union members saw Lin Xintong fly, they were momentarily stunned. Right, Yi Yun still had a partner. Although they were unsure of Lin Xintong's strength compared to Yi Yun's, it would probably be as easy as slaughtering poultry when it came to them. Zhulong already found it relatively demanding battling Yi Yun, so together with Lin Xintong. Even if Lin Xintong's strength was inferior to Yi Yun's, it was unlikely for Zhulong to withstand their combined efforts. Despite knowing this, no one dared to step forward to stop her. What a joke! With their strength, they would only be courting death if they tried to stop Lin Xintong. The blue ribbons fluttered as a sword beam flashed. Lin Xintong flew towards Zhulong like a fairy that was ascending towards the moon. Upon seeing this scene, Zhulong's expression changed. He naturally could not divert any strength to resist Lin Xintong at this moment. His expression immediately turned ferocious. Do you think you can send me to my doom just like that? Stop dreaming! As Zhulong spoke, he suddenly bit his tongue, spitting out a mouthful of blood essence. At the same moment, the area in between his eyebrows, which emanated blood traces around his body, spat out a crimson flame. Zhulong burned his blood essence on top of the foundation of him using his mystic technique, causing his strength to instantly increase. Oh! Lin Xintong's eyes tuned focus as she felt a hint of danger. She too did not expect for Zhulong to still had such an ace in his hand at such a moment. Zhulong had lived for many years and was a first-generation Blood Moon. The numerous life-saving hidden techniques he had surprised Lin Xintong. Lin Xintong naturally did not let Yi Yun's life be risked by allowing Zhulong to use his final tactic. She lifted her sword high up as heaven and earth energy gathered on her sword. In the skies above her, stars appeared out of nowhere, emitting twinkling starlight. The radiant sun was Yang, and the moon and stars were Yin. The power of the stars was one of the powers Lin Xintong had gained insight on while in the divine wilderness. Rising of wind from a moon halo, fluid like stars. Lin Xintong attacked. When she slashed out, it was as if the star-filled galactic arm crashed down from the sky, sending a silver waterfall surging at Zhulong. Zhulong became demented against Lin Xintong's attack. Die, all of you! The spatial dimension energy compressed within his body instantly exploded. The entrance to the alternate dimension behind Yi Yun abruptly exploded. This was an expansion of space itself. Its speed was unbelievably fast, with no way to evade it. Yi Yun had resisted the suction power from the alternate dimension. However, now, with the alternate dimension expanding, it devoured Yi Yun. It was relatively easy to resist, but with the spatial dimension rapidly expanding and devouring. In an instant, the surrounding mountains, black rock and land, all disappeared. Replacing them was the endless void of darkness. Even the full moon in the sky had been devoured, being utterly pitch black. Oh! Yi Yun was alarmed. This alternate dimension could expand and swallow him? Realizing that he had entered the alternate dimension, Yi Yun did not feel any fear, but felt something amiss. If Shulong really had such means to send him into the alternate dimension, then why didn't he not do so earlier? Even if a mystic technique was forcefully used together with the burning of blood essence, Shulong was likely willing to do so if he could finish off Lin Xintong and himself. However, Shulong had only used it at the final critical moment. Either it was an attack that caused them to perish together, or there was a weakness in this alternate dimension. Yi Yun immediately spread his spiritual energy in all directions. Xintong. Sis Xiaro. The spatial dimension had expanded too rapidly in an indomitable manner. Yi Yun was certain that this massive alternate dimension had probably devoured a large expanse. If that was the case, Lin Xintong and Jiang Xioro had also been devoured by the alternate dimension. Yi Yun was most concerned about these two women. They were the most important people in his life. Thankfully, Yi Yun sensed Lin Xintong's perception a second later. The laws of the alternate dimension were extremely strange. Despite them being very close to one another, they could not see each other and could only communicate through spiritual energy. And through their spiritual energy, they felt like they were separated by a large distance. Chapter 650, Land of Slumber. Shulong was definitely a thorny opponent. Shulong's attainment in spatial dimension laws had actually surpassed what he could display. He could not display everything he understood from the laws due to his present cultivation level. This is a spatial dimensional maze. Yi Yun was on high alert as he made sure to pay attention to everything around him. "Where's my sister?" Yi Yun asked Lin Xintong. After all, at the moment they entered this alternate dimension, Lin Xintong was closer to Jiang Xioro. "My perception has been following her all this time," Lin Xintong said. Since Yi Yun had handed Jiang Xioro to her, she naturally would not allow any mishaps to happen to Jiang Xioro. In fact, when the alternate dimension began to devour everything surrounding it, Lin Xintong had immediately flew towards Jiang Xioro. Now, she was actually very close to Jiang Xioro. "Xintong, protect my sister well." Yi Yun quickly transmitted his voice through his spiritual energy. Although he was worried about Jiang Xioro and worried if this alternate dimension was a drastic, final technique that Shulong was using to perish together with him, Yi Yun remained extremely calm. With Jiang Xioro's safety in Lin Xintong's hands, he did not stress over it, nor could he. He needed to consider where the alternate dimension's weakness was. The alternate dimension was just endless darkness and emptiness. As Yi Yun spread out his perception, he discovered a lot more people. These people were either the members from the Desolate Race or Heavenly Blood Union members. The warriors of the Desolate Race were alarmed when the alternate dimension suddenly appeared. Some of them were worried about Yi Yun and Shulong's battle. Some were even looking for and calling out to their queen, hoping to try their very best to ensure Jiang Xioro's safety. On the other side, the Heavenly Blood Union members became excited after a moment of panic. The scene in front of them was clearly Shulong's strongest move. This move was extremely powerful, causing an alternate dimension to devour the space that they were in. If Yi Yun was thrown into the deepest recesses of this alternate dimension, causing him to be lost in it until his death, that loneliness that accompanied his death was definitely more miserable than directly killing him. However, these people were also in the alternate dimension. They were somewhat panicking because they worried that they had been implicated by this final attack, resulting in them accompanying Yi Yun in death. These people looked around, searching for their companions, especially the reincarnators such as young Master Fengming, Fairy Sheiji, and company. They were the core members of the Martial Alliance, so it was unlikely that they would be abandoned even if Shulong used a mystic technique. As long as they found the reincarnators and followed them, they would be able to leave. As these people were thinking, a few of them suddenly felt a spatial suction enshroud them. Before they managed to react, they found themselves sucked through a spatial dimensional tunnel. During the spatial transference, they felt giddy and their ears rang. A few seconds later, they slammed to the ground. The group of people slammed to the ground in quite a wretched state. The discomfort brought about by the violent spatial transference gave them a headache. When they opened their eyes, they noticed that they had arrived in a vast land riddled with black rock. High in the sky hung the blood moon. This familiar scene. Wasn't this the Soul Tomb? This is the Soul Tomb? We are back. The Heavenly Blood Union members who returned to the Soul Tomb were overjoyed. Although they spent an extremely short amount of time in the alternate dimension, the endless darkness and loneliness surrounding them in that strange spatial dimension, as well as the fear of not being able to return, was still fresh on their minds. More and more people were teleported out to the Soul Tomb, including the reincarnators like young Master Fengming and company. With a more careful look, this place was no longer where Yi battled Zhulong. The location had changed. After entering and exiting the alternate dimension, they had been collectively teleported elsewhere. Where's Yi? Has that traitor died? Is he sealed in that alternate dimension? Upon seeing the reincarnators, the Heavenly Blood Union members began to bombard them with a flurry of questions. If Yi had died, they too could heave a sigh of relief. Fengming, Sheiji and Xiangqi did not respond because they too did not know. They had been sucked into the alternate dimension along with the rest of the Heavenly Blood Union members momentarily before being teleported out. There was no difference between them and the other Heavenly Blood Union members. Of course Yi has been sealed in the alternate dimension. Even if he's not dead, he's not far from it. At least, it won't be easy for him to come out. If not, what was the point of Lord Zhulong burning his blood essence to activate his final attack? Was it just to specially teleport us? A Heavenly Blood Union member said with confidence. When the others heard this, they too found it highly plausible. The price of Lord Zhulong's final attack was obviously nothing trivial. After battling Yi for so long, Zhulong probably had an estimation of Yi's strength. If this alternate dimension was useless against Yi, then what was the point of using that attack? At this moment, there were more and more people teleported to this area of the Soul Tomb. They were all Heavenly Blood Union members, while the Desolate race had all been filtered. This caused the Heavenly Blood Union members to feel greatly at ease. It appeared that Zhulong had used a killer move to trap all the enemies, and they had been saved. At this moment, in the alternate dimension, Yi spread his perception in all directions. He realized that the Heavenly Blood Union members that his perception had caught traces of had instantly disappeared after being sucked into a spatial dimensional tunnel. This is... Yi's heart sank. He clearly knew that the Heavenly Blood Union members were bodies nurtured carefully by the Blood Moon. They were riches that were to be possessed by the inspectors, and the main goal of the Blackstone trials was to send these bodies to the inspectors, so Zhulong naturally could not abandon those Heavenly Blood Union members. Now, with the Heavenly Blood Union members slowly disappearing, they were most likely being sent out of the alternate dimension, returning to the Soul Tomb. How could Yi watch idly as they escaped? With a thought, he interfaced his spiritual energy with the purple crystal. In the corner of the alternate dimension, a gray energy was toiling around. It seemed like a sliding black snake that was spitting out its tongue in the darkness. This was the evil energy that Yi controlled. After the masked man was killed by Zhulong, Shintu Nanshan's body was devastated, and this evil energy had secretly emanated outwards, to no one's notice. But now, under Yi's control, the evil energy traversed through the alternate dimension. Shoo! The evil energy entered a Heavenly Blood Union member's body. This Heavenly Blood Union member was a mustached youth in his 20s. He felt his tummy turn cold the moment the evil energy entered his body. But before he could react to it, he felt the heaven and earth undergo an upheaval the next moment. He was sucked into the spatial dimension tunnel, and he was thrown into another area in the Soul Tomb. After rubbing his giddy head, the mustached youth looked around and he saw many Heavenly Blood Union members, including reincarnators, gathered here. This was an extremely special valley. In the valley, there were stone pillars that rose up. Each of the stone pillars had a thick base and thin top. There were prolate spheroids indented outwards on each stone pillar, like large gray cocoons. Some of the cocoons were even moving slightly. It was unknown what was inside the large cocoons. "Where am I?" The mustached youth gave a look of puzzlement. At this moment, in the alternate dimension, Yi-Yun, who saw the scene through the evil energy, felt his heart sink. So it has finally begun. Yi-Yun took a deep breath as his eyes flashed coldly. The blood moon had finally revealed their fangs. He knew that this special area that contained numerous large cocoons was the land where the inspectors slumbered. Chapter 651, Tearing the Void. The goal of the Heavenly Blood Union partaking in the Blackstone trials was to awaken the slumbering inspectors. After reading the memories of the masked man, Yi-Yun knew that there were hundreds of inspectors in the Soul Tomb. Some of them had even been lying in slumber for tens of millions of years. The ancient inspectors that lay in slumber for tens of millions of years were sealed in a blood rock. They absorbed the heaven-earth killing chi and extreme powers from the Soul Tomb while laying in the long slumber. This allowed them to possess extremely terrifying strength. Compared to those ancient inspectors, the masked man was a lot weaker. The masked man was one of the inspector executives that were frequently sent out to complete missions. The ancient monsters and ancestors of the inspectors remained in slumber for cultivation. If these inspectors were awoken en masse, Blood Moon's strength would soar immediately. Yi-Yun naturally would not sit idle for that to happen. Yi-Yun, the alternate dimension that Zhulong created, might not be as powerful as we expect. The spatial barriers in here are slowly weakening. Lin Xintong's voice transmission rang in Yi-Yun's ear. After she found Jiang Xiao, she began searching for a method to break the alternate dimension open. Lin Xintong began to sense that the spatial energies in the alternate dimension were gradually depleting. If this trend continued, the spatial dimension would collapse after a period of time. It is weakening. Yi-Yun also noticed it. He was extremely calm at this moment, with his perception spreading everywhere, allowing him to sense each quantum of spatial energy and its dynamics. Maybe Zhulong was not planning on using this alternate dimension to bury all of us. He does not have the strength to forcefully hold us back in one fell swoop. He is only using this method to trap us and safely teleport the Heavenly Blood Union members away. Once the Heavenly Blood Union members are possessed by the inspectors, his mission would be accomplished. And at that moment, Zhulong would be able to lead those ancient inspectors in an attack. He might even wake the zombie kings sleeping in the Soul Tomb. He would then be able to wipe all of us out in here. In the Soul Tomb, there were many spiritual souls and zombie kings. The reason why Blood Moon and the Desolate Race chose to enter at this moment was because the worldly Yin Chi here would weaken. As such, those terrifying existences would also fall into slumber. And Yi-Yun knew that some of the ancient inspectors had the ability to control the spiritual souls, and they even had the ability to form a spiritual connection with the zombie kings. If a few zombie kings were woken up, it would be impossible for Lin Xintong and himself to take so many Desolate Race members out of the Soul Tomb. Yi-Yun said, "We cannot wait any further. I suspect that this is not an alternate dimension. It is actually just a spatial maze. Let me attempt at breaking the spatial barriers." The weakening of the spatial dimension's energy made Yi-Yun suspect that the alternate dimension set up by Zhulong was just a fake spatial dimension. Zhulong did not have the ability to transport Yi-Yun, Lin Xintong, Jiang Xiao and company to a distant, parallel spatial dimension. A true parallel spatial dimension would have existed for billions of years, so how could the spatial energies in it decrease in such a short period of time? Hence, Yi-Yun guessed that Zhulong was using his spatial laws to construct a spatial dimension maze, trapping everyone in the spatial maze. With the passage of time, this spatial maze, that did not have any additional energy maintaining it, would eventually dissipate away. Break the spatial maze open? Can you do it? Lin Xintong found it difficult. Although it was not a true alternate dimension, it was set up by Zhulong by forcefully using a mystic technique on top of burning his blood essence after all. Yi Yun's strength was most likely stronger than Zhulong in his normal state. However, if it was to compete with Zhulong after using his mystic technique, then it would be a close match. Furthermore, Yi Yun did not use spatial dimension laws, so to break through a spatial dimension maze would require brute force. It was too difficult to use brute force to suppress laws, what more laws that Zhulong understood over many incarnations. Lin Xintong believed that a large number of imperial kings in the Tian Yuan world did not have this ability. They needed to at least wait till the spatial dimension maze experienced a few days of energy depletion. I'll give it a shot. As long as there's sufficient energy, it is possible. Xintong, gather the Desolate Races members by your side. Do not miss anyone out. When the spatial dimension is opened up, the surging force would be tremendous. The rubble in the spatial dimension can even cause a spatial storm. Those who lack strength will be reduced to pieces. Yi Yun took a deep breath and he began circulating the Heart Sutra as he entered an ephemeral state. All right. Lin Xintong would not doubt Yi Yun's words. She immediately began gathering the Desolate Race, who were scattered throughout the spatial dimension maze. It was not a simple task as the spatial dimension maze distorted perceptions and paths, resulting in Lin Xintong having to spend quite a substantial amount of energy to search an area. Thankfully, many Desolate Race members were gathered together. As long as one of them was found, the others would not be too difficult to find, allowing them to find a huge group of them. Slowly, there were more and more Desolate Race members beside Lin Xintong. After a simple count, everyone was gathered. Combine forces to defend? After Chen Fei was seriously injured, the person in charge of leading the Desolate Race was a 20-year-old called Yu Lu. The Desolate Race worshipped the strong, so in front of the powerful Lin Xintong, Yu Lu was extremely courteous. Then why are we going to defend? Yi Yun is planning to break the spatial barriers open and he is afraid of harming all of you. Lin Xintong did not explain any further. When Yu Lu heard this, she felt palpitations in her heart. Break open the spatial barriers? How tough and resistant was a spatial barrier? Was Yi Yun planning on using his absolute attack to crack it open? However, now was not the time to question Yi Yun's methods. Yu Lu asked, "Do you want our help?" You would not be of much help, so just taking care of yourself would do. Lin Xintong shook her head. Yu Lu was rendered speechless as she said helplessly, "All right then." The Desolate Race members began to form protective energy shields. However, they wondered about the efficacy of this method. They might be able to last long with a protective shield, but what if breaking the spatial barrier failed? Lin Xintong injected her own power into the protective energy protection powered by the Desolate Race members. Immediately, the protective energy rapidly increased. We are ready. Lin Xintong transmitted her voice to Yi Yun. At this moment, Yi Yun was sitting in the middle of the spatial dimension maze. When he heard Lin Xintong's transmission, he suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was like lightning bolts shimmering in a dark spatial dimension. As he pressed downwards, the broken sword that laid across his lap disappeared, returning to his interspatial ring. With the great Empress Heart Sutra circulating, all of Yi Yun's yang qi gathered in his dantian, and it was compressed even further. As he accumulated more and more energy, it was all stored in the purple crystal. The purple crystal began to resonate violently, and behind Yi Yun, a golden crow and a 9 neonate phantom image appeared. 2 aspect totems were conjured together. When this energy was circulated to its limits, a golden beam shot into the sky from Yi Yun's head. The 2 aspect totems flew around, and they found themselves circling into a lustrous halo. The golden crow shrieked, while the 9 neonate roared. The golden light that shimmered seemed like a golden path. The spatial dimension's energy began to rotate as a golden spatial dimension door appeared out of nowhere and increased in size. Boom! With a large explosion, a divine pagoda emerged from the skies out of the spatial dimension door. Chapter 652, Reunion. This divine tower was majestic, like a mountain peak that could not be scaled. It came suppressing downwards while spinning. With it suppressing downwards, numerous cracks appeared throughout the void. Divine light flashed, illuminating the surroundings. The sounds of Sanskrit chants emitted out from the divine tower, while mysterious runic seals condensed around it, continuously increasing greatly in number. In just an instant, the black void was filled with condensed, golden runic seals. Even the members of the desolate race beside Lin Shinton saw this miraculous scene. Outside their energy shields, there were golden runic seals blanketing the area, as if there were golden dragonflies fluttering in the air. This is... The elites of the desolate race were all extremely shocked. This was the first time they saw light ever since they entered this alternate dimension. Inside this spatial maze, space was distorted, preventing two people, who were separated by 2 to 3 meters, to pinpoint each other's existence. There is a golden tower in the distance. A desolate race youth suddenly shouted out. The crowd looked out and indeed, they saw a shining golden divine tower in the horizon, far off in the distance. The divine tower seemed to be infinitely far away, yet they could still see it despite the distance. For some reason, it gave them a jolt in their hearts. The spatial forces distorted the spatial maze, even light was obstructed by it. However, under absolute strength, the divine tower's light was able to disperse the darkness. Suddenly, the golden dragonflies, dancing in the air, flew towards the divine tower. The dragonflies moved very quickly, forming strands of golden lines, illuminating the entirety of the dark void. Many members of the desolate race stared dumbfoundedly at the pretty scene happening before their eyes. It was as if this dark and lonely alternate dimension had been given life. Boom! Uncountable numbers of golden runic seals entered the tower, causing the divine tower to emit a blinding light that resembled the radiance of the sun. At that instant, pure yang energy dispersed the darkness and the distorted spatial energy. The spatial maze began to tremble, and with a ka-ka-ka, cracks began to appear in the space itself. They grew in number as they spread out everywhere like a web. With an explosive ring, the spatial barriers collapsed in large swaths. At the instant the spatial barriers exploded, the spatial energy lost its nomological bindings and began to separate out, forming an energy storm that blasted out in all directions. Outside the spatial barriers, there were mountains and valleys that were torn to shreds by the spatial storms. Large boulders were reduced to fragments and then further split, until they turned into dust. As the terrifying storm surged, it heavily collided with the protective energy shields jointly raised by the desolate race members. The energy shields violently trembled, the expressions of the desolate race members turning pale as they saw boulders the size of hills around them turn to dust. This was a complete annihilation, and it was happening before their eyes. It was a powerful assault on their visual senses. The people present felt fear from seeing this. Moments ago, they had been suspecting the efficacy of raising a protective energy shield, but now, when they imagined themselves being alone in the energy storm, they could see that they would have been destined to be reduced to dust. They were also thankful that Lin Shinton was present. With Lin Shinton's energy infused into their energy shields, it made it much easier for them to resist the storm. This Zhulong's strength is indeed terrifying. As Lin Shinton looked at the energy storm, she was well aware that most of the energy from the energy storm did not come from Yun, but from the spatial barriers, which was part of Zhulong's strength. A reincarnator's strength could not be underestimated. Yun had previously defeated Zhulong because of his weapon's advantage. The divine broken sword was highly effective against Zhulong's heaven's punishment. At this moment, the golden tower, hovering above the horizon, was slowly beginning to disappear. The energy storm also lessened in strength, allowing Lin Shinton to remove the energy shields. Seeing the last flicker of light disappear from the golden tower, Lin Shinton let out a sigh of relief. She naturally knew that the golden tower was the God Advent Tower. Yi Yun had obtained the God Advent Tower in the Great Empress Mystic Realm, and now, Yi Yun finally had the ability to use it. Even though Yi Yun could only use a tiny portion of its power, it was still a beginning worthy of being a pleasant surprise. As the spatial storm ceased, the spatial maze completely shattered. Yi Yun kept the God Advent Tower and landed on a black mountain peak with his face pale. Other than an immortal cave, the God Advent Tower was also a weapon. Its greatest effect was to suppress. The God Advent Tower was the perfect tool to suppress and shatter space. However, just using it for a few seconds caused Yi Yun to feel mentally exhausted and drained of his stamina. The exhaustion he felt from this was far greater than that from the battle with Julong. Using the God Advent Tower was still a very tough task for the Yi Yun at present. If he wanted to use it to kill his enemies, it would be even more difficult. After all, his enemies would not give Yi Yun the time he needed to activate the God Advent Tower. Furthermore, the speed of the God Advent Tower when it was controlled by him was not fast enough, so it would be very difficult to strike his opponents with it. If I break into the Yuan opening realm, it should be much easier for me to use the God Advent Tower. As Yi Yun had such thoughts, he became more eager to break through to the Yuan opening realm. As these thoughts flashed past his head, he suddenly saw a girl's red dress flutter on a mountain not far from him, looking towards him with watery eyes. The black pupils were bright and pretty, but they also betrayed the tears in them. Sis Xiaro. Seeing Jiang Xiao's pale face, Yi Yun felt shaken. They had experienced a decade of separation, without him knowing anything about how Sis Xiaro led her life with the desolate race. His figure flashed as he flew towards Jiang Xiao. Traversing the distance between two mountain peaks was done in an instant. He opened up his arms as he tightly embraced Jiang Xiao. He buried his head in Jiang Xiao's long hair, indulging in Jiang Xiao's breathing. This long-awaited feeling made him choke as he nearly teared. While resting on this delicate yet warm shoulder, Yi Yun could even faintly feel her collarbone. Hugging Jiang Xiao was like hugging a roll of silk. However, it was this delicate shoulder that had carried him home when Yi Yun first arrived into this world, weak and suffering from excruciating hunger. It was this shoulder that shouldered the responsibilities as the family's breadwinner in the food-scarce Cloud Wilderness. She worked overnight creating arrows and leather armors, in order to exchange for tiny bits of rations. She had quietly suffered and endured the bullying in the Lian tribal clan. Previously, Yi Yun nearly thought he was to be forever separated from Jiang Xiao in Shu Prefecture City. Only today, when he experienced that familiar yet gentle touch from embracing Jiang Xiao tightly, was he reminded that everything was over. Their futures were still within their own grasps. Yi Yun and Jiang Xiao embraced each other under the crimson moonlight coming from the red full-blood moon above the mountain peak. No one in the area spoke. Everything was silent, only the cold wind in the Soul Tomb blowing emitted a rustling sound. Chapter 653, Life Slips. Despite reuniting after a decade, Yi Yun and Jiang Xiao did not have the time to engage in reminiscence. They were still in the Soul Tomb, and facing the hostile Blood Moon. Against so many inspectors that were about to awake, they needed to immediately head to the inspector's slumbering grounds, and destroy everything within it. There were layer after layer of defenses for the protection of the Soul Tomb, making it extremely secure. The large array outside the Soul Tomb isolated the interior from the outside world. In the slumbering grounds of the inspectors, there were spatial mazes and numerous illusion arrays hidden with them. Even the entrance to the inspector's slumbering grounds changed frequently. Even with the masked man's memories, it would be very time-consuming to pinpoint the exact location of the slumbering grounds. Thankfully, Yi Yun had anticipated this. He had sent the evil energy to possess a Heavenly Blood Union member, so as to create a mark. This mark was like a flame burning in the darkness, which helped guide Yi Yun to find the inspector's slumbering grounds in the complicated arrays quickly. Leave 10 people to take care of the injured. The rest are to follow me. Yi Yun gave an order that was above doubt. The desolate race had mixed feelings when it came to Yi Yun. They knew that Jiang Xiao had a younger human brother, and she had sacrificed greatly for him back then. Even the condition for Jiang Shiro to fully integrate herself into the desolate race's world was for the shepherd boy to risk his life to save Yi Yun. Because of that, the desolate race's youth had their reservations over Yi Yun. Some of the younger males were even jealous of Yi Yun. However, with Yi Yun's strength today, he had managed to convince all of them. It became a matter of course to listen to the orders of Yi Yun, someone of a different species. At this moment, in the inspector's slumbering grounds, many Heavenly Blood Union members were looking at the tall, erect stone pillar, as well as the huge cocoons embedded in it, with fascination. What was this place? What were those gigantic cocoons? Lord Fengming, why have we been teleported here? Has that traitor, Yi Yun, died? Just as a few Heavenly Blood Union members were inquiring about Yi Yun's situation, there was suddenly a distortion in space before Zhulong appeared. At this moment, the cobweb bloodlines in the middle of Zhulong's eyebrows had disappeared, and what replaced them was a scar that looked like a flame that had been burning. A number of the elites present had previously met the Martial Alliance's alliance leader at the Martial Tea session organized by the Martial Alliance. They recalled that the Martial Alliance's alliance leader also had a similar flaming scar in the middle of his eyebrows. They realized that the scar was a result of augmenting oneself with the blood of gods. Zhulong's face was slightly pale, and his aura had weakened a lot more, as if he was ill. His lips moved slightly as he transmitted his voice to Fengming. I have to crush the second life slip? Fengming was stunned. When Zhulong and the other reincarnators entered the Soul Tomb, they were given a total of 3 life slips, which were used to communicate with headquarters. The Soul Tomb was an independent world, and due to the ancient array set up outside, it made it very difficult to transmit messages out. This was similar to the Great Empress Mystic Realm. To pass a message out of the completely sealed Great Empress Mystic Realm was an extremely difficult task for any of the large factions in the Tian Yuan world. The Soul Tomb was similar to the Great Empress Mystic Realm, so messages could not be exchanged even by Blood Moon. However, there were special life slips that could barely transmit some information. These life slips were quantum entangled. By crushing one life slip, the other would sense it and shatter as well. The 3 life slips Zhulong had each had their own meaning. Crushing the first life slip meant everything went smoothly. The mission is about almost completed. Crushing the second meant the team encountered unforeseen circumstances and are engaging in intense battle. As for the last life slip, it meant that the mission had completely failed. To Blood Moon's reincarnators, having to crush the second life slip despite being tasked to execute such a simple mission, along with such a strong lineup and a drop of the blood of the gods, was quite unacceptable. This uncertain outcome was too much for Fengming, Xiangqi, and Sheiji. Lord Zhulong, was the alternate dimension you set up in the end was not enough to finish Yi Yun? Do you think he has the ability to break through the spatial dimension array? Fengming was unwilling to crush the second life slip as it was too embarrassing. You can treat it as me having a life and death battle with Yi Yun. I have some understanding of his strength, and my alternate dimension should be able to trap him. As Zhulong spoke, he frowned slightly. Although it was unlikely that there would be problems with his inference, he just needed to trap Yi Yun for a few hours in the alternate dimension for them to successfully complete the possession. As long as the inspectors were revived, everything would be in place. However, Zhulong had an ominous sense for some reason. If that is the case, there's no need for Lord Zhulong to worry. Ignoring the fact that Yi Yun might not be able to crack the alternate dimension open, even if he does break it open, it would be almost impossible for him to find our location in the chaotic illusion arrays. I have already changed some of the settings of the illusion and spatial arrays along the perimeter. Yi Yun will not be able to crack the array within 4 hours. Fengming was confident that even if the masked man, who had betrayed the Blood Moon, drew a complete picture of the Soul Tomb's interior, it would still be extremely limited in helping Yi Yun find the inspector's slumbering grounds. Lord Zhulong, why don't we first crush the first life slip? Taking 10,000 steps back, even if Yi Yun has the greatest of abilities, and come to spoil our plans, it would not be too late to crush the second life slip. At this moment, Sheiji also spoke up. Zhulong nodded his head slightly. It was still a viable choice. With a wave of his hand, Fengming crushed the first life slip. Seeing the life slip turn to dust and scatter away with the wind, Fengming nodded with satisfaction. He then turned to the Heavenly Blood Union members present. There was a faint hint of greed in his eyes, like a snake watching its prey. However, he hid his thoughts extremely well. He still looked as gentlemanly as usual. Seeing Fengming look over, the present Heavenly Blood Union members could not help but ask, "Lord Fengming, has that traitor, Yi Yun, died or not? Also, what is this stone pillar and those large cocoons?" Yi Yun? Fengming sneered. Yi Yun is now trapped in an alternate dimension. Although he will not immediately die, he is already at death's doorstep. In a few hours, when we jointly open the seal, releasing the final hidden powers of the Martial Alliance, it will be a simple task to kill Yi Yun. The hidden powers of the Martial Alliance? Everyone was stunned hearing this. They were both alarmed and overjoyed. The Martial Alliance was already so strong, yet it still had hidden powers? Indeed, this organization that had lasted for tens of millions of years had an inheritance that exceeded one's imagination. Chapter 654, An unfolded map reveals a dagger. So that's what happened, we can feel assured now. That traitor Yi Yun should not be allowed to die easily. Right, that sort of person should have his soul extracted and body destroyed. His soul should be tortured for a century before his soul is completely annihilated. What are the hidden powers of the Martial Alliance? I'm really looking forward to seeing them. Upon hearing Fengming's words, everyone relaxed and they were somewhat elated. Fengming had a slithering smile filled with deception and bad intentions hidden behind his generous face. He opened his trademark folding fan and he began to fan himself gently. He pointed at the stone pillars behind him and said, "Are you curious as to what these cocoons are? Let me tell you now that these cocoons are the hidden powers sealed by the Martial Alliance." Oh? Everyone looked at the large cocoons with their eyes lighting up. That is it? No wonder we were brought here. What could be the Martial Alliance's hidden powers? Many people looked forward to it, but there were a few people who were secretly afraid, such as Wei Chi-wei, the Chu sisters and company. The 6 of them were considered traitor accomplices with Yi Yun's betrayal. They believed that they would be ostracized by the Martial Alliance, or even be killed. However, not only were they not being questioned, they were even teleported here by the reincarnators. And up to now, none of the Martial Alliance's reincarnators bothered about them, as if they were thin air. Fengming said, "The seals on the large cocoons have been in place for a very long time. The seals need to be simultaneously removed, so your help will be needed. Now, I'll read out names, and that person is to go to a designated cocoon to meditate." First, Feng Yunhai. Fengming began reading out names. Every warrior whose name was read out was led to a large cocoon by Qiangqi or Sheiji. These people began meditating near their respective cocoon, somewhat at a loss. Every large cocoon in the inspector's slumbering grounds contained an inspector with varying strengths. The Blood Moon assigned a corresponding body according to the respective inspector's strength. By doing so, they could produce the strongest combat strength. It took a total of 30 minutes before all the names were read out, including Wei Chi-wei, the Chu sisters and company. They were each assigned to a corresponding large cocoon. Sitting above their respective large cocoons, the Chu sisters could sense a faint evil aura coming from the cocoons, sending shivers down their back. What was this all about? Why were they given the opportunity to participate in the final plan? They looked at Wei Chi-wei and the bald youth. The two of them also looked uneasy, as if they were sitting on a large cocoon that contained a powerful primordial beast. Alright, the removal of the seals will also allow you to be correspondingly rewarded. So work hard and release our Martial Alliance's final hidden powers. This is the final goal of this Blackstone Trials. Feng Ming said those words with a gentle and mild voice, and it had an extremely rousing effect. The rewards handed out by the Martial Alliance had always been the pursuit of the youths present over all these years. Carefully feel the seal in the large cocoon near you. Inject as much energy as possible into it so you can remove it. Feng Ming gave the order. Everyone sent their perception into their respective large cocoons to sense the existence of the seal. Many people did so without any doubts, and they began to inject their own yuan qi into the large cocoons without any reservations. However, there were a very small minority who had their reservations about this. In the soul tomb, which was fraught with dangers, injecting large amounts of energy into the cocoons, which would weaken themselves, was not a safe thing to do. Besides, the method needed to remove the seals made them hesitate. What was sealed in the cocoons? Was it a weapon? Or was it some ancient life force? It was something sealed tens of millions of years ago, and it was still as strong as ever? Then, was it dangerous for them to be so close to it? But at this moment, it was meaningless to think about all of that. After all, they had signed a soul contract, so they could not openly disobey the Martial Alliance's orders. Seeing their peers trying their best to inject their own yuan qi into the cocoons without any reservations, these people also began to compete with them. They did not wish to fall behind, all because of the rewards promised by the Martial Alliance. Over all these years, they had enjoyed many perks from the Martial Alliance. They were extremely sensitive to the word rewards. As time slowly passed, many of them gradually began to be covered in sweat. As a result of draining their energies, they began to suffer from the after effects. Zhulong remained expressionless. As for Feng Ming, a smile suffused on his lips while he had his arms crossed in front of his chest. He was estimating the energy depletion progress of everyone. The more energy they drained, the more energy would be given to the inspectors sleeping in the cocoons, allowing the possession to go more smoothly. Begin. Zhulong transmitted his voice. All right. Feng Ming, Sheiji and Xiangqi stood in a trigram formation. While Feng Ming looked calm, Sheiji looked expressionless and Xiangqi's eyes flashed. The three of them joined force to condense several array runes. These array runes began to ripple forward like water waves. When the array runes touched the cocoons embedded in the stone pillar, the cocoons absorbed them immediately. Once the array runes touched the surface of the cocoons seemed to come alive. Faint red light emanated from the cocoon and flickered. One could even see inside some of the smaller cocoons due to the translucent stone pillar. It looked like there was a soul swimming around in them. Is the seal about to be released? Seeing Feng Ming, Xiangqi and Sheiji begin to help them remove the seals, everyone worked even harder to inject their energies, wishing that they would be the first to release the seal. But at this moment... A Heavenly Blood Union member gave a tragic cry. He suddenly felt an excruciating pain in his head, as the cocoon beneath him suddenly seemed to transform into a demon that was devouring everything. He was originally the one injecting energy into the cocoon, but now, the cocoon had begun to initiate the absorption of his body's energy. Not only was it absorbing energy, it was also absorbing his spiritual soul's power through the energy connection. Although the bodies of warriors were strong, their spiritual souls were extremely weak. Once it was injured, it was very difficult to treat it. However, his spiritual soul's power was being absorbed. There was no way to resist the powerful suction. The cocoon seemed to transform into an avaricious primordial desolate beast that devoured everything. What's going on? As the suction increased in intensity, the Heavenly Blood Union member's face turned pale. He had a twisted expression as the pain of his soul seed being forcefully torn apart made it seem like ripping his hair would give him greater comfort. He only wished that he could tear his head open so he could forcefully sever the connection. He was terror-stricken as he felt his life force being rapidly depleted. If this carried on, he would probably die. Save me! Please save me! He shouted for help. But at this moment, he was met with the tragic cries of others. In fact, these cocoons had array traps in them. With the three reincarnators controlling them, the Heavenly Blood Union members were unable to withstand them in their extremely weak states. Furthermore, there were direct spiritual attacks coming from the inspectors in the cocoons. Lord Zhulong. Lord Fengming. At this moment, many of the Heavenly Blood Union members present sensed that all of this was instigated by the Martial Alliance, but they refused to accept the facts. While grabbing onto their last hopes, they wished that everything that was happening was due to an abnormal result of the cocoons laying dormant for too long, something that the Martial Alliance did not expect would happen. They treated Zhulong, Fengming and company as the final life-saving straw. They stubbornly refused to believe that these people were the conspirators behind all this, because if that was the case, they were undoubtedly doomed. However, the hopes of these naive youths were very quickly shattered heartlessly. As Zhulong looked at all this, he appeared cold and distant. As for Fengming, a smile hung on his face, as if he was enjoying everything that was happening before his eyes. During the next 15 minutes of struggling, many of them experienced the cycle of fainting, but were again awoken by the agonizing pain that came from their souls. This cycle repeated several times. Only then did Zhulong begin to speak slowly. It takes time to build an army, but a moment to deploy them. Now, it's time for you to be deployed. To awaken the inspectors sleeping in the soul tomb, your bodies are the best vessels for the specters. There is no need to resist, as it would only give you more pain. It is meaningless. The human race's calamity is about to begin, and you shall be on the forefront of it all. You can contribute towards the calamity, and be remembered by history. Your bodies will also be put to even greater use under the hands of these future pioneers. Maybe in the future, your bodies will become gods. You should now feel honored for that possibility in the future. Zhulong said with a frank and calm tone, as if everything said was a matter of fact. However, when these words landed in the Heavenly Blood Union members' ears, it left them cold and hanging, as if they had received a jolt. Their last hopes had been destroyed. The inspectors sleeping in the cocoons were about to take possession of their bodies. And their souls will be food for those inspectors, as soulful nourishment. In the future, their bodies will appear in another form, and the people in control of their body would no longer be themselves, but some evil souls. Just thinking of these souls, which controlled their bodies, appear in their daily lives, deceiving their friends and family, enjoying their women, made many Heavenly Blood Union members tremble with rage. What was even more infuriating was that Zhulong mentioned that their bodies would be put to greater use under the hands of future pioneers. They should feel honored. Honor? It was preposterous. Cold sweat drenched the faces of many of them as they gritted their teeth. Their organs were all twisted together from rage. Could this order be passed down from the upper echelons of the Martial Alliance? The Blackstone trials was a trap from the very beginning? They were only chosen for their bodies. Even the Heavenly Tao Union's existence was for this day. They were like pigs reared to be slaughtered? Zhulong, do you know what you are doing? My family will not let this go easily. The Martial Alliance might be powerful, but it will be destroyed if it incurs public outrage. You will die very terribly. Many of the Heavenly Blood Union members present began to issue deafening threats, but Zhulong turned a deaf ear towards all of this. Chapter 655, Black Armored Demon God. As the battles continued in the Soul Tomb, tens of millions of miles away, in the untraversable sea. On the surface of the calm but dead silent untraversable sea, 7 pure black mountains stood erect at the end of the vast nothingness. These 7 mountains were the shape of humans. The middle mountain was the shape of a man wearing black battle armor with a lance in his hands. Instead of calling it a mountain, it was better to describe it as a sculpture. Silver starlight fell from the sky. Although it was still daytime in the Tianyuan world, there was perennial darkness in this area where the 7 divine mountains stood. Starlight seemed to pool together like water, before flowing into the middle mountain. And while the mountain's runic patterns was being illuminated by the starlight, the black-armored god of war was receiving a baptism of starlight, becoming ever clearer. These 7 mountains were the 7 demon disciples from tens of millions of years ago. As for the middle mountain, if Iyun was here, he would immediately recognize the lance-wielding black-armored warrior as the one who fought the Azure Young Lord in a videodisc array that he saw in the God Advent Tower more than 7 years ago. In the video projection, the Azure Yang Lord's astounding sword attack had given Iyun a lot of insights. As for the black-armored warrior, although he had been defeated by the Azure Yang Lord, his mightiness left a deep impression on Iyun. Today, a group of black-robed people came to the vicinity of where the black-armored warrior Divine Mountains stood. On their robes, there was a blood moon embroidered on their chests. They were Blood Moon's reincarnators, and they were the upper echelons of Blood Moon as well. The person leading them had a flaming scar on his forehead. He was a first-generation Blood Moon member, and he was also the Martial Alliance's alliance leader, and he was currently the person with executive control over Blood Moon. There were a total of 13 people. At this moment, they looked solemnly at the black-armored warrior who had already fully actualized. If this carries on, the black-armored demon god will immediately awaken. A reincarnator said as he looked at the black-armored demon god's sculpture. Tens of millions of years ago, the 7 demon disciples were sealed by the Azure Yang Lord. But with the immense amount of time, the heaven-earth powers and the energy from the cosmos were constantly weakening the seals. Furthermore, 7 years ago, when the Eye of Destruction appeared beneath the eternal whirlpool, the stirring of the Eye of Destruction sped up the black-armored demon god's awakening. The black-armored demon god's awakening was long planned by the upper echelons of Blood Moon, and it was something they looked forward to. However, now was not the time. Set up an array formation to seal the black-armored demon god's powers. Let him sleep for a period of time. The man with the flaming scar on his forehead said. His words stunned a few reincarnators who had existed for less than 1,000,000 years. Seal the black-armored demon god's consciousness? Why? Over all these years, Blood Moon had been laying dormant in the Tian Yuan world. They had built up the inspectors and developed the reincarnators, all for this day. Now with the black-armored demon god about to awaken, everything would be set in place once he did so. The desolate race was definitely no match for the black-armored demon god. But now, the alliance leader had given the command to temporarily seal the black-armored demon god's consciousness? And the few people standing beside the alliance leader did not seem surprised at the command, as if everything was only right and proper. It baffled some of the reincarnators though. Wouldn't the black-armored demon god's awakening speed up the Divine Master's return to this world? Someone could not help but ask. Blood Moon was an organization, and also a religion. As for the Blood Moon congregation's addressing of Divine Master, it was the god of Blood Moon's religion. Awaken? The man with the flaming scar shook his head and he did not give an explanation. But a thin man beside him smiled and said, the Divine Master has never broken the seal open since ancient times. Tens of millions of years ago, he had been sealed by Jian Qingyang once again. It is not so simple for the Divine Master to completely awaken and break the shackles of his confinement. Besides, why would we invite a god here to worship him, and willingly be his slave? Oh! The moment the thin man said those words, it stunned everyone else. What did this mean? The thin man carried on. Our Blood Moon organization was established by the 7 demon disciples, tens of millions of years ago. Its establishment was just to resist Jian Qingyang and the Desolate Race Army. To put it bluntly, us as Blood Moon are just the demon disciples' tools. Blood Moon of the past was far more powerful than it is now. But after the war with the Desolate Race and the long passage of time, the Blood Moon has become what it is now. There are only reincarnators and inspectors, continuing on through endless sleeping. Do you still think it's not enough being their tools? Now, the Eye of Destruction is still sealed, and the 7 demon disciples are asleep, yet you want to awaken them to carry on becoming their tools? Or do you want to establish a new order, and become the overlords of this world yourselves? The thin man's words quaked the hearts of the reincarnators. Become the overlords of this world themselves? They had never thought so far ahead, but if they gave it careful thought, Blood Moon's purpose may have continued on for tens of millions of years, and they knew of Blood Moon's past and mission. But over the million years of reincarnation, they had never heard Blood Moon mention the revival of the 7 demon disciples or allowing the Divine Master to escape from the seal. It appeared as if the upper echelons of the Blood Moon had ulterior ambitions a long time ago. Indeed, they were just chess pieces used tens of millions of years ago after all. The Eye of Destruction was not a benefactor of theirs, so why should they render any service to him? That seal? Someone asked anxiously. They did not know how secure the seal in the eternal whirlpool was. If the Divine Master could awaken by himself, they would be doomed. With that, the man with the flaming scar said, tens of millions of years ago, the 7 demon disciples underestimated Jian Qingyang. The Divine Master had just awoken back then, and he was still restrained by the ancient seal. Yet, he attracted Jian Qingyang and that woman who dealt a serious blow to the Divine Master after entering the eternal whirlpool together. In addition to the ancient seal, the Divine Master's consciousness was injured. 7 years ago, the Divine Master's projection appearance was just a stimulative reflex from the opening of the Great Empress Mystic Realm. Chapter 656, Spectres Awaken. A thick, dense evil spectre energy covered the slumbering grounds of the Spectres in the Soul Tomb. This place was supposed to be dark, with the red moon's light masked by dust, but there was an eerie ghostly blue fire that swirled around. Zhulong. Feng Ming. All of you are crazy. Killing us is equivalent to declaring war on every faction in the entire Tian Yuan world. The Martial Alliance may be strong, but it is just a slightly bigger faction. It cannot defeat the entire Tian Yuan world. Let us go. All the Heavenly Blood Union members were being restricted by the large cocoon's arrays. They were shouting crazily in the beginning, but towards the end, the fear and excruciating pain had drained them of their willpower. They could not resist due to the restrictions from the arrays. Furthermore, with something from the large cocoon trying to crawl into their brains, that sense of helplessness and the splitting pain in their heads was indescribable. Let me go. I have always been loyal to the Martial Alliance. I signed a soul contract. Slowly, some of them finally bent over and began pleading to Zhulong. Zhulong remained expressionless towards this. As for Qiangqi, he enjoyed listening to this. The corners of his mouth curved up and said with a teasing tone, "The cries while struggling in pain sure is a fantastic sound. Don't worry. Your pain will come to an end quickly. The prolate spheroidal large cocoons beneath you are called soul cocoons. The things inside them will end your suffering, and finally merge with you, bringing great strength to your bodies. Are you excited? Listen. Something is coming out from inside. Sha sha sha. Sha sha sha. This sound was extremely ear-piercing. It was as if something sharp was crawling through rocks, sending an itch down to the bone. Ka-cha. A soul cocoon beneath a Heavenly Blood Union member opened up, as if it had been cut open. Following that, a long black worm crawled out. The long worm was about the thickness of a finger and it was cylindrical in shape. It was covered in a black carapace, while its head and eyes were dark red in color. It had dozens of thin and short feet. The sound before seemed to come from its feet rubbing against the soul cocoon's stony surface. The black worm used its feelers to gently touch the Heavenly Blood Union member's head. The touch made him shudder all over. Soul-devouring worms consume spiritual and yin souls as food. It cannot devour the yin specters that are sleeping in the soul cocoons due to an array's protection. But the soul-devouring worms use the soul cocoons as their nest. The remnant spiritual soul energy after they devour yin souls within the soul cocoon is the best supplement for the yin specters. Qiangqi laughed sinisterly. The Heavenly Blood Union member was already terror-stricken, and more than a dozen of these worms had crawled out from the soul cocoon beneath him. They began to crawl towards his brain through his ears. The long, black worms that were as thick as fingers made him feel like his ear canal was about to burst open while they crawled inside. As the soul-devouring worms laboriously crawled deep inside, their sharp feet tore through skin and flesh, causing large amounts of blood to flow out. Ah, ah, ah! The Heavenly Blood Union member let out a blood-curdling scream. This method of death was not inferior to death by heart dismembering. Right after the soul-devouring worms crawled into the youth's ears, a cold, energy began to spread from the tips of his limbs throughout his body. That was the inspector that slept in the soul cocoon. It had finally awoken, and it was beginning to enjoy the delicacy awaiting it. A soul seed chewed through by a soul-devouring worm made it even easier to possess. The soul-devouring worms and the inspector entered the body almost at the same time. As the Heavenly Blood Union member's body started to twist, he foamed from his mouth as his eyes rolled back, leaving only the white in his eyes. Seeing the Heavenly Blood Union's terrible state, the human warriors present felt a jolt through their hearts. As warriors, some of them were not too afraid of a simple death, but dying in such a horrible manner challenged their psychological baseline. Especially many of the pretty young girls were scared out of their wits. Their rosy cheeks had now turned as pale as a sheet. They did not wish to die, especially not becoming fodder for such terrifying worms. They did not want their beautiful bodies to become ugly, possessed by inspectors and wantonly abused. At this moment, Chukur, who was beside Wei Chi-wei, was almost on her last breaths. Her cultivation level was very low, so she could not endure such devastation. As for her elder sister, Chu Qinger, her situation was not any better. She was drenched in sweat as her hair clung to her forehead. The most terrifying thing was that she was no longer in control of her body. It was impossible to use her energy to commit suicide. In the middle of the few stone pillars, there was a gigantic soul cocoon, at least twice the size of other soul cocoons. No Heavenly Blood Union member was arranged to be placed on this soul cocoon. In this largest soul cocoon, there lay an ancient inspector. Its strength was extremely high, and it was the earliest first-generation inspector. Zhulong had planned to place Yi Yun in this spot. As his talent was outstanding, it was extremely suitable for his body to be the vessel of the ancient inspector. However, Yi Yun was too monstrous. Ignoring the idea of possessing him, just his appearance would lead to a calamity. As for arranging others to be possessed by this ancient inspector, Zhulong found no one suitable. The other Heavenly Blood Union members' bodies were insufficient to fully bring out the ancient inspector's strength. Hence, Zhulong left this spot empty, allowing the strongest ancient inspector to carry on its slumber. He was waiting for the upper echelons of Blood Moon to cripple Yi Yun first before using his body as the ancient inspector's vessel. However, just a moment ago, a life slip on Zhulong's body shattered. Zhulong could use the life slip to transmit information from the soul tomb outside, and similarly, the outside world had the ability to transmit information to Zhulong. The life slip that shattered meant that accidents had happened in the revival plans of the demon disciples. It urged Zhulong to quickly bring the inspectors in the soul tomb to the untraversable sea, so as to help the upper echelons of Blood Moon control the array formation. Zhulong knew that tens of millions of years ago, the first-generation Blood Moon, which included himself, had chosen the black-armored demon god as their target, slowly wiping off the consciousness of the black-armored demon god. Back then, when the 7 demon disciples engaged in a massive battle with the Azure Yang Lord, the 7 demon disciples had been sealed by him, entering an extremely long slumber. This slumber might even last more than 100 million years. The black-armored demon god received the heaviest injury to his soul sea. Blood Moon had even suspected that the black-armored demon god had lost his consciousness. Tens of millions of years ago, Blood Moon's mission was to save the 7 demon disciples. However, when they saw the 7 demon disciples lose most of their power, the upper echelons of Blood Moon started feeling tempted. Working for others was not as good as controlling the world. This was probably human nature. Zhulong frowned as he looked at the life slip that had shattered in his hand. He did not know what accident had happened in the untraversable sea. After a short hesitation, he grabbed a youth from the Heavenly Blood Union members who had relatively good talent, and directly threw him on the soul cocoon that contained the ancient inspector. And this person coincidentally was the Jian Wuxuan who had fought Yi Yuan in Heaven Martial City. Chapter 657, Tearing the Void Again. Jian Wuxuan had always been loyal to the Martial Alliance. He had been proud of being a member of the Heavenly Blood Union. But now, he had been violently thrown onto the largest soul cocoon. His body began to convulse as he suffered an excruciating pain in his soul. He felt like the evil spirit in the soul cocoon had already begun invading his body, devouring his spiritual soul bit by bit. Lord Zhulong. Jian Wuxuan lay in the soul cocoon in a weak and limp state. He stretched his hands out weakly towards Zhulong, as his fingers trembled. He refused to believe that the Martial Alliance, who he had been always loyal towards to the point of abandoning his family clan to forever join the Martial Alliance, would now treat him in such a manner. Seeing the cold and distant Zhulong and the hideous Qiangqi, who was enjoying all of this, Jian Wuxuan let out a tragic laugh. He derided how pathetic and stupid he was. Qiangqi sneered as he glanced at Jian Wuxuan, before turning to ask Zhulong, "This pretty boy is just a bit better than those trash. Will his body do?" Zhulong shook his head, "We need to attempt it even it's not suitable. We have to take all the ancient inspectors out of the soul tomb this time." As he spoke, he waved his hand casually, and plumes of soul fires flew out from his black sleeves. This soul fires were the Heavenly Blood Union members that had been killed in the battle with the Desolate Race. Gong Sun Hong, who had been killed by Yi Yuan, was also one of the soul fires. With his body destroyed, Gong Sun Hong yearned to cultivate the Heavenly Tao reincarnation grand technique, allowing himself to have a brand new body, so as to fulfill his aspirations and ambitions. Gong Sun Hong was still a bit stunned when he was thrown out into the slumbering grounds of the inspectors. There were stone pillars and strange stone cocoons here. As for those Heavenly Blood Union members, they were now all pinned to gigantic cocoons, either struggling or crying out in pain. Seeing their twisted expressions, it was as if they wished for a quick death. What was this? Gong Sun Hong was dumbfounded. This was also part of executing the mission? It did not seem like it. Then, as he looked at the reincarnators from the Heavenly Blood Union, the cold Zhulong, the smirking Sheiji, the savage and malefic Qiangqi, Gong Sun Hong suddenly felt a cold intense surge at him, causing his spiritual soul flame to tremble. He had a strong sense of unease. Lord Zhulong. What is this about? Gong Sun Hong was panic-stricken, as he felt that the Zhulong standing in front of him was like an ancient evil demon. Zhulong calmly said, "I was planning on refining all of you into inspectors, nurturing you for future use, but there is now no more time. So, I will have to let you down by making you soul food for the inspector, allowing the ancient inspector that has been sleeping for tens of millions of years to quickly recover its peak strength." As Zhulong, he grabbed Gong Sun Hong and the other Heavenly Blood Union members and threw them at the gigantic soul cocoon where Jian Wuxuan was. Ah! Gong Sun Hong let out a tragic scream. However, he was just a spiritual embodiment, so how could he resist? His spiritual soul flame as well as the other Heavenly Blood Union members were swept up by an immense force, as they slowly merged into the soul cocoon, and the soul-devouring worms devoured them. By then, a inspector had completely merged itself into a Heavenly Blood Union member's body. A youth in his 20s stood up from the soul cocoon, but his footing was unstable as his expression looked vacant. His eyes had already turned crimson red. He suddenly grabbed a few bloody black worms from his ears, and with a crushing sound, squeezed them to pieces. He then threw the wriggling corpse on the ground, crushing them flat. The first stage of this youth's possession was completed, but the inspector was unable to fully control this body, resulting in him still being in a dazed state. Qiangqi laughed. "Cheers to your waking up. How does this new body feel?" Feng Ming, who was beside Xiangqi, also said, "Hurry and get acclimatized, so as to control this body perfectly. There are serious matters awaiting us." There were waves of trouble during the Blackstone trials, and after a prolonged period of time, the first inspector had finally awoken. As such, in less than an hour, all the inspectors would awaken, then everything would be set in stone. When they thought about this, Xiangqi and Feng Ming heaved a sigh of relief. However, at this moment, Zhulong's expression suddenly changed. He felt a sense of danger surge at his heart, causing his body to freeze up. "Dodge!" Zhulong shouted deeply. "What?" Feng Ming, Xiangqi and Sheiji were stunned momentarily. "Dodge!" Zhulong roared angrily. At the same time, his body suddenly leaped up as he flew upwards. As for Feng Ming, Xiangqi and Sheiji, although they were slower by half a beat, they flew in all directions just in time. Boom! A deafening explosion echoed. The entire slumbering ground of the inspectors, valleys and stone pillars trembled. In the space where Zhulong, Feng Ming and company were standing, it looked like glass that had been smashed by a hammer. Large pieces of spatial barrier fragments had peeled off as a golden divine tower flew out of a spatial hole, suppressing the heaven and earth. "This is..." Zhulong and the other three reincarnators were alarmed. A divine tower had smashed through the spatial maze surrounding the inspector's slumbering ground? The spatial maze was extremely hidden, so how could it be discovered by others and shattered in one strike? After the spatial barrier was shattered, it formed a spatial tornado storm. The spatial storm was heading towards the stone pillars, which would cause the inspectors that had not awakened to be destroyed by the storm. Zhulong loudly roared and punched out. Pang! Zhulong's fist wind impacted the spatial storm, causing it to explode, dissipating into nothingness. The spatial barriers surrounding the inspector's slumbering ground were far weaker than the alternate dimension barrier that Yi Yun had previously broken open. If not, Zhulong would have found it very difficult to resist the spatial storm, leading to many inspectors to perish in the spatial storm. And correspondingly, Yi Yun would have consumed a great amount of stamina if he wanted to break open a more powerful spatial barrier. Just as Zhulong's punch smashed through the spatial storm. Phew! A sharp whistle tore through the air as a golden beam streaked across the darkness, straight at Zhulong. It was an arrow. Zhulong's pupils constricted when he saw the arrow. Yi Yun! It's really you! Be it the aura that accompanied the arrow, or the pure yang laws imbued within the arrow, they convinced Zhulong that it was undoubtedly coming from Yi Yun. He did not immediately understand what method Yi Yun had used to be able to so quickly escape from the alternate dimension, and find the inspector's slumbering grounds through the layers of spatial dimensional mazes. The threatening arrow's attack did not give Zhulong the time to ruminate over it. He gritted his teeth and dodged sideways. He had not recovered from the injuries from overdrafting his blood essence, so he was currently in an extremely terrible condition. Furthermore, he had just dissipated the spatial storm. Since he had just finished his move and having used up his energy, it was impossible for him to withstand Yi Yun's arrow. The arrow brushed past Zhulong's shoulder, tearing through Zhulong's protective Yuan Qi. After the arrow shot past Zhulong, the arrow unbelievably changed its angle just before it collided with a mountain. This slight change made it face the inspector that had just awoken. This inspector was still in a daze. Before it could fully control its new body, it already saw the arrow fly at it. Ah! The inspector let out an angry growl, but its body was unable to keep up with its soul. Since it was unable to use the energy in the body, and it was even still repressing the resistance that came from the body's owner in the Soul Sea, it was unable to dodge immediately. The golden arrow was too fast, and with it unable to block, the arrow penetrated its body. Boom! The newly born inspector exploded from the arrow's strike, as its body split into pieces, even shattering its soul. Dead! The inspector who had suddenly been killed, the golden explosion as well as the golden tower that suppressed the heaven and earth attracted everyone's attention. At this moment, the golden tower was still spinning, but began shrinking in size. And out from the shattered space came Yi Yun, who was engulfed in pure yang golden flames. He held a bow in his hand as he walked out. And following behind him were two beautiful ladies, dressed in red and white. They were Jiang Xiao and Lin Xintong. Chapter 658, Pure Yang Energy Arrows. To all of the Heavenly Blood Union members, who were struggling in pain while lying prostrated on the soul cocoons, Yi Yun, who appeared with the two peerless ladies, was similar to a heavenly king that came from the heavens. If one did not consider his relationship with the Heavenly Blood Union members present, his appearance was like that of a heavenly king coming to save his people. However, the fact was that Yi Yun was previously accused of being a traitor. Many of the Heavenly Blood Union members had hated Yi Yun and disgruntled with him. With jealousy, in addition to the new and old grudges, this resulted in many hoping that Yi Yun would die. Even the alias Yi Yun used to enter the Heavenly Dao Union, Zhang Yidao, was ostracized by the Heavenly Blood Union members. Just before entering the Blackstone trials, many people had even derided, scolded and mocked Yi Yun for being cowardly and inhumane. He had chosen to escape when faced with a trial that would greatly impact the survival of the human race. He was then only forcibly brought back by the masked man. After all this derision and scolding, these previously highly spirited elites, upon meeting Yi Yun in the inspector's slumbering ground, were now in such pathetic states. As for Yi Yun, he apparently already knew of the nefarious schemes of the Martial Alliance. Yi Yun's quitting was probably a result of these schemes. However, later on, Yi Yun had gained control of the masked man and returned to the Heavenly Dao Union, joining the Blackstone trials. All of this was to completely destroy the Martial Alliance's scheme. Just thinking of these things made many of them falter. They had no place to hide their shame. Just thinking about their previous actions made them label themselves as incorrigible idiots. Now, although they did not know the Martial Alliance's goals, they knew that the Martial Alliance was not some benign organization. The price the Martial Alliance needed to pay for killing all of them in the Soul Tomb was to become enemies with the entire Tian Yuan world. Therefore, the most likely outcome was that the Martial Alliance planned to use their martial prowess to enslave the entire Tian Yuan world. The level of brutality and evil by such actions was probably worse than that of the Desolate race. Young Master Yi, save me. A Heavenly Blood Union member stretched out his hand, imploring Yi Yun to save him. As warriors, they were outstanding amongst peers in their own age, so they were naturally arrogant. Now, however, he was in too much pain. Under the threat of a death, the torture of his soul sea and the soul-devouring worms tearing through his ear canal, all of his arrogance had vanished. He did not want to die for no reason in this land that never saw the light of day. He did not want to become food for the Yin souls. He wanted to survive. He wanted to return to his family clan, expose the Martial Alliance's nefarious schemes. Young Master Yi, I was dumb. I maligned you. But we were duped. Save me. Many elites, who had always been smug, began to plead for Yi Yun's help. They knew that the only person that could save them now was Yi Yun. These people really have thrown away all of their dignity. A desolate race girl, who replaced Chen Fei to lead the Skyfox, said disdainfully from behind Yi Yun. When one's life is under threat, dignity becomes extremely extravagant. Besides, the pain they are experiencing in their soul sea is unimaginable by us. Yi Yun, save them. Their lives can be put to good use. Lin Xintong said. To overthrow Blood Moon, they first needed to expose Blood Moon, and these people were the best witnesses. Got it. With the sun shooting 9 death's bow in hand, Yi Yun pulled open the bowstring. He did not string an arrow, but used pure yang energy as arrows. Pure yang flames condensed together at Yi Yun's fingertips, forming into 6 pure yang arrows. Pang! The bowstring twanged, and the first targets of the arrows that shot out were Wei Chi Wei, the Chu sisters and company. Since the 6 of them had followed Yi Yun's lead, their safety was to be ensured. Stop them! Zhu Lon yelled in exasperation. Not far behind him, Sheiji, Fengming and Xiangqi charged forward. Aspect totem phantom images conjured up behind them. There was a gigantic serpent, a firebird and a ferocious tiger with wings on its back. At the same moment as these three people moved, Lin Xintong also moved. Her dress fluttered as starlight fell from the skies, dispersing the gloomy mist while gathering on Lin Xintong's sword. Lin Xintong slashed out her sword, like a surging river splitting the sky in two. On the surging river, a phantom image of a simply dressed woman appeared, briskly walking on the river, as if she was chasing time itself as it was receding away. Sheiji, Fengming and Xiangqi's aspect totem phantom images were swept up in the surging Totem phantom images were swept up in the surging river. As numerous ice crystals froze on them, the three aspect totems began to struggle violently. Bang! 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 The aspect totems that were condensed from energy froze and cracked in the frosty ice. Lin Xintong brandished her sword with an indomitable slash. The expressions of the three changed greatly as they used their respective means to defend themselves. However, Lin Xintong's sword beam was too sharp and too quick. The laws imbued within the beams came from the Great Empress Heart Sutra. They were profound and intangible. Ah! Xiangqi tragically cried out as his stomach was pierced through. Amongst the three of them, he was the weakest. It was not because he had a low cultivation, but because he had been injured in his fight against Zhang Xioro. He had not yet recovered, so he was unable to withstand Lin Xintong's attack. Xiangqi's expression twisted as he held his stomach in pain. Not a single drop of blood flowed out from his wound. Instead, numerous ice crystals began to form on his wound, and they grew, along his meridians, towards his limbs. Xiangqi's face turned pale, as he knew deeply that if the ice crystals pervaded his meridians, he would undoubtedly lose all combat ability. If his meridians were severed, a large portion of his cultivation would be crippled. Just a single slash was this powerful? Lin Xintong had never shown her true strength, but now, from the looks of it, she was not any weaker than Yi Yun. It was likely that they were equal in strength. While Lin Xintong caused the three reincarnators to retreat from a single slash, severely injuring Xiangqi in the process, Yi Yun's energy arrows had flown in front of Wei Qiwei, the Chu sisters and company. Shoo! 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 The 6 energy arrows stabbed straight into the large cocoons. Yin specters were just Yin souls. Before having a body, they had no combat ability other than being able to possess. They were like turtles without their shells. And pure yang energy was the most effective energy against Yin and evil spiritual beings. With the pure yang arrows entering the Yin specter's nest, it was a fatal blow towards the Yin specters who had yet to finish possessing a body. Shie! Azure smoke emitted out of the soul cocoons that were shot. One could hear the faint but miserable cry of the spiritual souls. These 6 Yin specters were severed from their connection with Wei Qiwei and company. They were either severely injured or reduced to nothingness from Yi Yun's arrows. Ah! With the connections suddenly severed, Wei Qiwei, Chu Kur, Chu Qinger and company rolled off the soul cocoons, slamming heavily onto the ground in an utterly helpless manner. However, they had managed to keep their lives. Yet, the impact on their soul seas was probably not recoverable without a few months of recuperation. Senior brother Jiang, I have to thank you again. We are truly useless. Wei Qiwei said with a falter. He was accustomed to calling Yi Yun senior brother Jiang. The Chu sisters were also pale. They looked at him with gratitude but also felt ashamed. They felt that they had been too burdensome. Yi Yun only gave them a light smile, indicating for the 6 of them to not take it too hard. Following that, he pulled the sun-shooting 9 death's bow open, and this time, 12 pure yang energy arrows appeared on the bowstring. The energy arrows were aimed at the soul cocoons. With the bowstring pulled open, Yi Yun's expression turned cold and penetrating, as if he was a peerless god of war. Phew! The moment Yi Yun released his fingers, 12 energy arrows shot out. The incorporeal inspectors were like sitting ducks in front of the sun shooting 9 deaths bow as they were unable to withstand Yi Yun's attacks. If a pull of his bow could shoot out 12 arrows, severely injuring or even killing 12 inspectors, it would just need Yi Yun a few pulls of his bow to destroy all the inspectors within the slumbering grounds. Hence, Zhulong could not sit idle while watching this happen. The moment Yi Yun pulled open his bow for a second time, Zhulong moved. With heaven's punishment in hand, he punched at Yi Yun's energy arrows. In the prior, intense battle with Yi Yun, Zhulong's hands had been injured, and was still in the midst of recovering. Furthermore, the effects of using a mystic technique and overdrafting his qi and blood had yet to be diminished. Although his punch still possessed an extremely astounding aura, Yi Yun's keen senses told him this aura was much weaker than before. Boom! Zhulong's fist collided with all the energy arrows Yi Yun shot out. As the energy arrows exploded, the pure yang energy contained within it gushed out, causing pure yang flames to soar upwards. At the same moment Zhulong shattered the energy arrows, Yi Yun made his move. With the pure yang broken sword in hand, he charged straight at Zhulong. Yi Yun's 2 aspect totems, the golden crow and 9 neonate, appeared behind him, as his sword beam streaked across the void. Lin Xintong followed closely behind Yi Yun. Lin Xintong was dressed in clothes white as snow, and as she brandished her sword, a lake appeared out of nowhere behind her. The lake was deep blue in color, with wavelets sparkling that emitted an indescribable frost chi. Far away into the distance, a radiant moon hung above the lake, sending forth a watery glow. As Lin Xintong's sword was augmented with the frost moon's illumination, it came screaming at Zhulong. As the inspectors were undergoing their revival process, every second counted. Since Lin Xintong no longer needed to protect Zhang Xiaro, she joined forces with Yi Yun to kill Zhulong in the shortest amount of time in a 2-against-1 situation. With both swords used in unison, one was yin and another was yang. Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had been cultivating together for years, and had been cultivating the Great Empress Heart Sutra together. Although the laws they cultivated in were complete opposites, they complemented each other. Their combined strength was not just a simple case of addition. Instantly, Zhulong felt the pressure increase. Behind him were the unrevived inspectors. Without any room to retreat, he could only desperately drain his energy to punch out again and again. "Help me!" Zhulong bellowed. Behind him, Fengming, Sheiji, Xiangqi and the other reincarnators could only summon their courage to charge forward. Previously, they had Heavenly Blood Union members helping them, but now with all of them engaged in the possession process, they could only count on themselves to withstand Lin Xintong and Yi Yun's attack. They knew very well that only by enduring until a majority of the inspectors were revived would they be able to turn the tide of the war. If not, they were definitely doomed. A multitude of sword beams flashed, some consisting of solar rainbows, while others were the frosty lunar rivers. The vicissitudes of yin and yang seemed ever triumphant. Ah! Xiangqi, who had been suffering from his injuries, was the first person to succumb. His curved yuan qi was shattered by the sword beams as he let out a terrible cry while flying backwards. Beside him, Sheiji was injured by Lin Xintong's sword qi once again. The frost qi on the blade tip slashed open Sheiji's wrists, causing her palms to immediately freeze, seemingly becoming as brittle as ice crystals. The frost qi meandered upwards along Sheiji's arm, causing her expression to change. As she retreated, she began circulating her yuan qi to withstand Lin Xintong's frost qi, however to no avail. The frost qi, which seemed indestructible, forcefully broke through Sheiji's meridians, and spreaded towards Sheiji's heart. This indomitable frost qi contained the nomological insights of Lin Xintong. As she realized this, she knew charging forward again was no different from flinging herself at death. Although it was needed to further delay them until the inspectors were revived, she still needed survive up to that point. Without Sheiji and Xiangqi, Fengming and Zhulong found it harder to resist. Fengming could only serve the purpose of causing some confusion, as the combined forces from Yi Yun and Lin Xintong were mostly shouldered by Zhulong alone. Zhulong bit the tip of tongue and struck out with fist shadows that filled the sky. Although he was still injured, and fighting 1 against 2, Zhulong's attacks were not to be belittled. He had managed to forcefully cause Yi Yun and Lin Xintong's sword chi to slow down. Die! Zhulong roared as all the muscles on his face twitched. He charged at the duo without any regard. Yi Yun and Lin Xintong remained calm as their swords interweaved together, sending out their second strike. Boom! The convergence of pure yang and pure yin once again surged at Zhulong. As Zhulong was midway through his charge, his energy rapidly depleted. A torrent of sword chi assaulted his protective yuan chi. He was like an exhausted fish swimming upstream against rapids, and was nearing his limit. Pang! Zhulong's protective yuan chi began to crack as the first fractures began to form. With a crisp snap from his right hand's fingers, his fractured fingers that had yet to fully recovered once again ruptured. His offense also came to a momentary stop. In a life-and-death battle, even a fraction of a second of hesitation could result in a complete reversal in the outcome. Furthermore, he was facing the combined efforts of Yi Yun and Lin Xintong in battle. Zhulong's heart immediately sank, for Yi Yun and Lin Xintong's swords were already in front of him. Yi Yun's sword was like the blinding radiant sun, while Lin Xintong's sword seemed like the calmest gentle breeze. However, the sense of imminent danger that accompanied the sword beams resembled the terrifying blood pools in the pits of hell. The wails of numerous people permeated the wind that surged at Zhulong. In this blood-red hurricane in front of him, Zhulong was like a tiny boat futilely battling the elements in the sea. He would be overwhelmed and destroyed in an instant. Dodging was out of the question as Zhulong bellowed and punched out with both fists, slamming into Lin Xintong and Yi Yun's swords. Zhulong could barely manage resisting one person, but now with two. Boom! A deafening ring reverberated in Zhulong's ears. The boom was a result of the violent energy that accompanied the two swords that had ripped open his flesh, exploding within his body. As energy flushed out, Zhulong's shoulders had already exploded into two plumes of bloody red mist. The powerful impact sent him flying backwards. After slamming to the ground, he slid for another 1,000 feet, leaving behind a deep ravine in the ground. Zhulong finally came to a stop when he crashed heavily into a stone pillar where inspectors slept. He only felt a tremble along his back, as black blood gushed out from the corner of his mouth. Zhulong's face had turned pale. The two swords had stabbed into his hands through heaven's punishment, causing all the joints in both his hands to fracture. Yi Yun held the broken sword in hand, which was still dripping with fresh blood. However, the fresh blood did not remain on the rusty blade, but was instead absorbed by the broken sword. Without any hesitation, Yi Yun brandished the pure yang broken sword and struck once again. The time it took to traverse a distance of 1,000 feet was nothing but an instant to Yi Yun. In a blink of an eye, his blade had stabbed straight at Zhulong's eyebrows. Die! Taking advantage of his perilous situation, Yi Yun's sword surged with killing intent. A golden blast of wind transformed into a roaring golden wave that reached 1,000 feet in height, as if it could drown mountains that littered the lands. Against this terrifying aura, Zhulong suddenly felt a deep chill. He felt his death approaching. Time seemed to slow down, as absolute despair made Zhulong go ballistic. You want to kill me? I'll perish together with you. Zhulong bellowed in a craze. He was disgruntled. He had reincarnated so many times, and every incarnation he had allowed him to lord over numerous lives. He stood on a precipice over all those people, enjoying their worship, and the fear they felt towards him. As for Yi Yun, he was just a young genius in his 20s. How could he compete with him? Die, 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 die. Zhulong burned his blood essence as he was engulfed in flames formed from his blood and chi. Inside the red inferno, he punched out his left hand that wore heaven punishment, seemingly sending a thick blob of blood straight at the roaring blood wave. Boom! This punch was sky-trembling and earth-shaking. But at the same moment, Lin Xintong also made her move. Her spiritual energy had locked onto Zhulong's energy circulation a while ago. At the instant Zhulong punched out without any regard, Lin Xintong's sword chi had entwined itself around Zhulong's punch beam like an exquisite winding river. Yin and softness always accompanied each other. The purine laws Lin Xintong knew was imbued in her sword, and was best at overcoming hardness with softness. This sword beam's aim was not to kill, nor was it to directly clash with Zhulong's punch beam. Instead, it was to redirect, conquering the unyielding with a tiny bit of force. Zhulong felt his fist lighten as his energy seemed to rapidly diminish like a receding tide. The force from his fist had been redirected away by Lin Xintong. With the force from his fist greatly reduced, how was he to resist Yi Yun's sword? Amidst the chaotic freedom of random energy pulsations, an ancient blade emerged, tearing through the pure yang flames silently, and then piercing through the burning blood and qi. What seemed like an ordinary and unsophisticated sword was actually judgment from the heavens. When it slowly stabbed at Zhulong's heart in an indelible fashion, Zhulong widened his eyes. Disgruntledness, hatred and disbelief, there were too many feelings contained within Zhulong's eyes. Pwah! With a crisp ring, the energetic explosions around him were nothing much, but it was infinitely clear in Zhulong's ears. His chest felt a searing heat, as his heart was penetrated by the broken sword. Each pulsation of his heart seemed to become a struggle against the blade, and every contraction of his heart caused large amounts of blood to gush out. As blood spurted out from his wound, Zhulong grabbed the pure yang broken sword with one hand, while his other hand was clenched tightly in a fist. You. Zhulong's lips quivered as he stared deadly at Yi Yun. His eyes had turned blood red from hatred. With the broken sword in hand, Yi Yun exerted some force with a twist of his wrist, causing pure yang yuan qi to surge out from the broken sword, flooding out towards Zhulong's limbs, burning his meridians and blood along the way. Zhulong's body convulsed violently as his pupils lost their focus. Yi Yun had already turned a blur in his vision. The twisted pure yang broken sword had diced his heart. Killing me will make you pay the price. The Blood Moon's inheritance. Zhulong's lips trembled. Every word he said caused more blood to seep out from the corner of his mouth. However, before he could finish his sentence, the pure yang broken sword swiped across his neck. You can die already. Yi Yun said those words nonchalantly with an expressionless face. Slowly, he wiped the blood of his blade. Zhulong's head jerked sideways as his throat seemed to open. His head fell back, eyes staring. They looked at the dark clouds and blood moon in the sky, having died with everlasting regret. Chapter 659, Zhulong's Doomsday. Chapter 660, Feeding and Nurturing. Under the combined forces of Lin Xintong and Yi Yun, Zhulong was killed. Fengming, Sheiji and Xiangqi were dumbfounded as they watched this. Zhulong was dead. As a first-generation Blood Moon, Zhulong was actually one of the leaders of the upper echelons of Blood Moon. But now, he had been killed by the duo after just completing a reincarnation due to not having fully recovered his strength and cultivation level. The moment Zhulong died, the remaining reincarnators were like sheep waiting to be slaughtered. There was no way for them to survive. As reincarnators, they had a bright future ahead. In their previous lives, they were accustomed to be in control of the lives of others. But now, their lives were in the hands of others. However, Yi Yun ignored the trio at this moment. The inspector's possession was about to complete, so if he were to delay any further, more and more inspectors would be revived. These inspectors might not be able to immediately control their new bodies fully as they had been in deep sleep for too long. They needed time to fully regain consciousness. Separate all the human warriors' mental connection with the inspectors. Yi Yun said to the desolate race warriors behind him. At this moment, Yi Yun was a formidable god of war in the minds of the desolate race warriors. They were utterly convinced by his killing of Zhulong with Lin Xintong. The moment he gave the order, the desolate race warriors charged forward like a surging tide. Sheiji, Fengming and Xiangqi could only watch by the sides idly, as they were completely helpless to resist, nor did they dare to. Although these desolate race's Skyfox members lacked strength, they were sufficient enough to deal with the unrevived inspectors. They charged at the stone pillars like a pack of wolves, forcefully and violently pulling the human warriors from the large cocoons. The human warriors lamented. Their soul seas were enduring the assaults from the inspectors, giving them splitting headaches. Amongst some of them, there were even soul-devouring worms wriggling endlessly in their ears. Hence, the additional feeling of being thrown to the ground was not a pleasant feeling. The saved human warriors looked at the desolate race warriors, who were previously their foes, with complicated expressions. They never expected that the outcome of the Blackstone trials would end up like this. They had nearly been harmed to death by Blood Moon, but they were eventually saved by the desolate race. Many people, who were exonerated from their suffering, looked up at the hovering and sun-shooting Nine Deaths bow-wielding Iyun with mixed emotions. At this moment, with the bow in his left hand, he shot arrows consecutively. Pure Yang energy arrows tore through the darkness, penetrating several soul cocoons. With a crisp chi-chi-chi sound that was intermixed with the wails of spiritual souls in pain, large numbers of inspectors were burned by the pure Yang flames. Ah! A inspector broke out of a soul cocoons as it could no longer withstand the searing pure Yang flames. This inspector was like tumultuous blue flame. And one could faintly see a human face with a painful expression in the flames. It charged straight at Iyun without any regard. Inspectors did not have any bodies, nor could they use energy. However, this inspector had the means to make a final attack, possession. If the spiritual soul power of a warrior to be possessed was much weaker than the inspector's, the inspector could directly possess the warrior's body. But if the difference was not great, it would lead to an internecine struggle, and the most extreme outcome would be the inspector vaporizing, while the warrior became a retard. This inspector had been slumbering for tens of millions of years. It had yet to possess a body, but it had fully awakened. It knew that if it did not kill this human, all of them would be reduced to nothing. It also knew that the human in front of it was very powerful and that it was impossible for it to possess the human with its own strength. Hence, it released its soul power to let the inspectors who were struggling in the surrounding soul cocoons to combine efforts to attack Iyun. Hum hum hum, hum hum hum. The shrieking of the wind combined with the angry wails was a result of large numbers of inspectors charging out of the soul cocoons to attack Iyun. Some of these inspectors were like gigantic skulls, while some were like demons that crawled out of the depths of hell. Some of them had yet to recover their consciousness, only having basic instincts of possession. Under the blue inspector's summoning, they charged forward without any fear of dying. If so many inspectors charged into Iyun's soul sea, no matter how powerful his spiritual soul was, it would be impossible for him to endure so many spiritual attacks. However, how could Iyun give the inspectors a chance to approach him? With a thought, the golden crow behind him let out a sharp shrill as it spread its wings. It then embraced Iyun with its wings like a ball of sun. Pure Yang flames were best at subduing evil Yin powers. The first few inspectors that charged at him were like moths flying at a bonfire. Their spiritual bodies were engulfed by the flames, as they were reduced to cyan smoke. Whoosh! 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 From where Iyun was, one energy arrow after another was shot in all directions. It was like the sun that emitted endless golden light. Wherever the energy arrows passed, they would penetrate the inspectors, burning a large black hole through their incorporeal bodies. Momentarily, the entire valley was filled with the ghostly wails. Without being able to use energy, even the ancient inspectors could not approach anywhere close to Iyun. As long as they were unable to close the distance, they were unable to invade Iyun's soul sea, and the only thing that awaited them was to be destroyed. However, these ancient inspectors had slept in the soul tomb for tens of millions of years, resulting in their spiritual souls too extremely powerful from the soul tomb's evil Yin nourishment. Even though they were burned by the pure Yang flames and had energy arrows penetrating their incorporeal bodies, the inspectors did not die. Instead, they began to gel together once again. At this moment, with a thought, Iyun waved his hand. In a corner of the valley, an inconspicuous Heavenly Blood Union member's body jolted. A black energy emerged from the top of his head. This energy, which contained an eviline aura that far exceeded the inspector's, floated towards Yi Yun. It was the evil energy that Yi Yun controlled using the purple crystal. Back when the masked man took possession of Shintu Nanshan's corpse, his soul sea had been invaded by the evil energy. Without him knowing anything, the evil energy's energy strands had emanated throughout the masked man's soul sea, consuming the masked man's spiritual body without a trace. This extremely strange energy had the ability to devour spiritual energy. And what was most astounding was that it was constantly maturing. Now, Yi Yun's control of this evil energy was equivalent to rearing tigers. Yi Yun wanted to use this energy for himself, but he was fully aware that this energy could one day escape from his control. However, with the purple crystal, Yi Yun restricted the energy greatly. With just a thought, he could wipe away the tiny bit of consciousness that the evil energy had generated over a long period of time. As long as it lacked consciousness, this energy was nothing to be afraid of. Now, to kill the inspectors, Yi Yun released the evil energy. Immediately, this energy was like a wolf that entered a flock of sheep, as it began to crazily devour the inspectors.